Hey there, it's Scott Detrow from NPR News. Welcome to night 3 of the Democratic National Convention. The big speaker tonight is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He will accept his party's nomination for the vice presidency. We're going to hear from a lot of other high-profile speakers as well, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who has been a major figure in the Democratic Party over the last month. We will also hear from former President Bill Clinton. So stick with us for our live coverage of tonight's convention. That is going to begin in just a little bit at 9 Eastern. We will be simulcasting on your local NPR affiliate as well as here on this video stream. And I am joined now in studio by my bud, NPR's senior political editor and correspondent, Domenico Montanaro. Hey, Domenico.
Hey, Scott.
What are you going to be looking for tonight?
Well, we've got the big speech from Pete Buttigieg, as well as former President Bill Clinton, who, former President Obama once declared the explainer in chief.
Mm-hmm.
So, we expect that he'll probably talk a bit about the economy, try to frame it in the way that Bill Clinton generally does. Going to be interested to see what Pete Buttigieg says, considering he's seen as someone who is part of the future of the Democratic Party and certainly has his own way with words and being able to really frame the narrative of what this election means.
Right. Buttigieg, along with Kamala Harris, were really the two main people who ran for the presidency 4 years ago that Joe Biden brought into his administration. Buttigieg was somebody who was on the, I don't know if it's the medium list, right? Because he didn't seem to be one of the final contenders when it went down to Tim Walz. But we do know that Kamala Harris did interview Pete Buttigieg to possibly serve as her vice president. He's clearly somebody who's thinking about his next move down the line in one way or another.
Well, early on in the Biden White House, when a lot of people were thinking that Biden might not try to run for re-election, there was this conversation really that was between Kamala Harris as the potential presidential pick or Pete Buttigieg.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to have sort of been lost in a lot of this conversation, where I never expected him to be Harris's VP. I always expected him to sort of be a 1 in 1A in competing for this nomination potentially if Biden had stepped aside. But everybody had told me that it would be very, very difficult to take it away from Harris, who's the vice president, who would potentially be the first black woman to be president, first South Asian president, really big historical things. And Pete Buttigieg has certainly gotten on board.
And we saw how quickly everybody coalesced around Kamala Harris that Sunday afternoon. By the afternoon, Biden says he's not going to run. Then he endorses Harris, and by nightfall, it was no question that it was going to be her nomination. But so Buttigieg is one of the speakers tonight. There's also on the Rising Stars list, we're going to hear from two governors who are talked about as national figures, Wes Moore of Maryland, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. But I want to ask about another flavor of speakers that we've been hearing throughout the week because there's more tonight. Olivia Troy and Jeff Duncan are both going to speak tonight. Troy was a national security official in the Trump White House, working for Vice President Pence. Duncan is the former lieutenant governor of Georgia. Both of them are Republicans, and they are voting for Harris. They are stumping for Harris. How unusual is something like that?
Well, it's interesting because in 2004, it was seen as a really big deal that Zell Miller, the former congressman, went out and spoke, at the Republican convention, essentially saying that John Kerry was too liberal to be president. And everyone made a huge deal out of that. And it was really searing and seemed to be something that, really kind of derailed in some respects John Kerry's hopes. And to have this many Republicans at a Democratic convention speak, it's not just tonight, but we saw, last night, for example, the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, who's a Republican, who also did the same thing. This is not a huge number of Republicans in the country. Republicans, for the most part, 85-90% of or so who identify as Republicans still say in polling that they're going to vote for former President Trump. But the idea here is for Democrats to be able to show that they're not so radical. They're not this radical liberal ticket that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are trying to say that they are.
Let's listen to a little bit of one of the speeches from last night along these lines. This was Mesa, Arizona Mayor John Giles.
I have a confession to make. I'm a lifelong Republican. So I feel a little out of place tonight, but I feel more at home here than in today's Republican Party. The grand old party has been kidnapped by extremists and devolved into a cult, the cult of Donald Trump. Trump doesn't know the first thing about public service. Like a child, he acts purely out of self-interest. We all need an adult in the White House, And we've seen what happens when we don't have one. Trump made a lot of lofty promises: unlimited economic growth, American manufacturing reborn, a secure border. Turns out Donald Trump was all talk. He wanted our votes, but he couldn't deliver a thing. But these days, my city of Mesa, Arizona is on the move. I'm going to ribbon cuttings every single week, all because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris reached across the aisle and they delivered for my conservative community and countless more across the country. My hero, John McCain, taught us to put country over party. And that's how Vice President Harris and Governor Walz will lead too. I have an urgent message for the majority of Americans who, like me, are in the political middle. John McCain's Republican Party is gone, and we don't owe a damn thing to what's been left behind. So let's turn the page. Let's put country first. Let's put adults in the room where our country deserves. Thank you.
That was John Giles, who, again, was one of many Republicans. Nobody really a high wattage star in the Republican Party, but like you said, Domenico, a lot of rank-and-file Republicans, former Trump officials, saying they're voting for Harris, and maybe that's a play for independent or more moderate-leaning voters. I want to talk about a very different kind of speaker from last night.
Yeah, sure.
Nearly 24 hours later is still generating a lot of headlines, and that is former First Lady Michelle Obama, who's such an interesting figure because she has made it so clear she does not like the political world,
No.
and she was happy to leave it, and she has by and large left it. So she appears every 4 years or so, and the one exception that she makes ends up being one of the most powerful speeches of that period of time when she does decide to give an address and speak to Democrats and speak to the country. She's an incredibly powerful speaker.
This felt like a speech that she had been wanting to give, things that she'd been wanting to say for at least 8 years since the Obamas left the White House. It really was the kind of speech and things that she said that she could never have said as First Lady, as a potential First Lady on the campaign trail in 2007 and 2008, because consultants would have said, you can't say these things, be careful in what you're saying, because Obama was very careful, walking a very fine line to not try to alienate white voters, for example. And this really had to do not with white voters, but about Donald Trump in particular. So she tried to always say, when they go low, we go high. Last night was not that.
It was not that. Let's listen to that speech from Michelle Obama.
Something wonderfully magical is in the air, isn't it? Yeah. You know, we're feeling it here in this arena, but it's spreading all across this country we love. A familiar feeling that's been buried too deep for far too long. You know what I'm talking about. It's the contagious power of hope. The anticipation, the energy, the exhilaration of once again being on the cusp of a brighter day. The chance to vanquish the demons of fear, division, and hate that have consumed us and continue pursuing the unfinished promise of this great nation, the dream that our parents and grandparents fought and died and sacrificed for. America, hope is making a comeback. Yeah. But to be honest, I am realizing that until recently, I have mourned the dimming of that hope. And maybe you've experienced the same feelings, that deep pit in my stomach, a palpable sense of dread about the future. And for me, that mourning has also been mixed with my own personal grief. The last time I was here in my hometown was to memorialize my mother, the woman who showed me the meaning of hard work and humility and decency, the woman who set my moral compass high and showed me the power of my own voice. Folks, I still feel her loss so profoundly. I wasn't even sure if I'd be steady enough to stand before you tonight, but my heart compelled me to be here because of the sense of duty that I feel to honor her memory and to remind us all not to squander the sacrifices our elders made to give us a better future. You see, my mom, in her steady, quiet way, lived out that striving sense of hope every single day of her life. She believed that all children, all people have value, that anyone can succeed if given the opportunity. She and my father didn't aspire to be wealthy. In fact, they were suspicious of folks who took more than they needed. They understood that it wasn't enough for their kids to thrive if everyone else around us was drowning. So my mother volunteered at the local school. She always looked out for the other kids on the block. She was glad to do the thankless, unglamorous work that for generations has strengthened the fabric of this nation. The belief that if you do unto others, if you love thy neighbor, if you work and scrape and sacrifice, it will pay off. If not for you, then maybe for your children or your grandchildren. You see, those values have been passed on through family farms and factory towns, through tree-lined streets and crowded tenements, through prayer groups and National Guard units and social studies classrooms. Those were the values my mother poured into me until her very last breath. Kamala Harris and I built our lives on those same foundational values. Even though our mothers grew up an ocean apart, they shared the same belief in the promise of this country. That's why her mother moved here from India at 19. It's why she taught Kamala about justice, about the obligation to lift others up, about our responsibility to give more than we take. She'd often tell her daughter, "Don't sit around and complain about things, do something." So, with that voice in her head, Kamala went out and she worked hard in school, graduating from an HBCU, earning her law degree at a state school. And then she went on to work for the people, fighting to hold lawbreakers accountable, strengthening the rule of law, fighting to get folks better wages, cheaper prescription drugs, a good education, decent health care, child care, elder care. From a middle-class household, Kamala worked her way up to become Vice President of the United States of America. My girl, Kamala Harris, is more than ready for this moment. She is one of the most qualified people ever to seek the office of the presidency. And she is one of the most dignified. A tribute to her mother, to my mother, and to your mother too. The embodiment of the stories we tell ourselves about this country. Her story is your story. It's my story. It's the story of the vast majority of Americans trying to build a better life. Look, Kamala knows, like we do, that regardless of where you come from, what you look like, who you love, how you worship, or what's in your bank account, we all deserve the opportunity to build a decent life. All of our contributions deserve to be accepted and valued. Because no one has a monopoly on what it means to be an American. No one. Kamala has shown her allegiance to this nation, not by spewing anger and bitterness, but by living a life of service and always pushing the doors of opportunity open to others. She understands that most of us will never be afforded the grace of failing forward. We will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth. If we bankrupt a business or choke in a crisis, we don't get a second, third, or fourth chance. If things don't go our way, we don't have the luxury of whining or cheating others to get further ahead. No. We don't get to change the rules so we always win. If we see a mountain in front of us, we don't expect there to be an escalator waiting to take us to the top. No. We put our heads down. We get to work. In America, we do something. And throughout her entire life, that's what we've seen from Kamala Harris. The steel of her spine, the steadiness of her upbringing, the honesty of her example, and yes, the joy of her laughter and her light. It couldn't be more obvious. Of the two major candidates in this race, only Kamala Harris truly understands the unseen labor and unwavering commitment that has always made America great. Now, unfortunately, we know what comes next. We know folks are going to do everything they can to distort her truth. My husband and I sadly know a little something about this. For years, Donald Trump did everything in his power to try to make people fear us. See, his limited, narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of two hard-working, highly educated, successful people who happen to be black. Wait. I want to know. Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs? Look, it's his same old con. His same old con. Doubling down on ugly, misogynistic, racist lies as a substitute for real ideas and solutions that will actually make people's lives better. Look, because cutting our health care, taking away our freedom to control our bodies, the freedom to become a mother through IVF like I did, those things are not going to improve the health outcomes of our wives, mothers, and daughters. Shutting down the Department of Education, banning our books, none of that will prepare our kids for the future. Demonizing our children for being who they are and loving who they love, look, that doesn't make anybody's life better. Instead, it only makes us small. And let me tell you this, going small is never the answer. Going small is the opposite of what we teach our kids. Going small is petty, it's unhealthy, and quite frankly, it's unpresidential. So, why would any of us accept this from anyone seeking our highest office? Why would we normalize that type of backward leadership? Doing so only demeans and cheapens our politics. It only serves to further discourage good, big-hearted people from wanting to get involved at all. America, our parents taught us better than that, and we deserve so much better than that. That's why we must do everything in our power to elect two of those good, big-hearted people. There is no other choice than Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. No other choice.
That was Michelle Obama speaking at the convention last night. Barack Obama followed her up, but a day later, I think more people are still talking about Michelle Obama than Barack Obama. Domenico, you talked before about how this was just a different speech than she could have given when she was First Lady, than the way that the party, the politics, the conversation has moved over these past 8 years. I think that that phrase from the speech, that response to the attacks from Trump and many Republicans, the affirmative action of generational wealth, I think to me that immediately enters the political lexicon the same way when they go low, we go high. Just a very different time, a very different meaning, but instantly crystallizing something a lot of people were feeling.
Definitely. I mean, I wrote that line down, her saying that she doesn't have the ability to fail forward. Most people don't. Most people don't get a second, third, fourth chance in the face of failing in a crisis. Very strong words for someone who had avoided that kind of thing for a very long time. And she certainly did something really, advanced, frankly, in making a speech, being able to invert something like affirmative action to make it more of a almost blue collar, anthem in a way.
Right.
So, I think that she's somebody who clearly has the heart of the Democratic Party. When her husband came out, he said, I might be the only person stupid enough in the country to follow Michelle Obama. He did then go on to follow Michelle Obama.
Nothing he could do about it at that point. I'll talk tomorrow instead. Thanks.
And he certainly told the narrative, that Democrats need. He tried to prosecute the case. He had some tough love for liberals as well to say, that you've got to be able to kind of put your differences aside and get together. She did some of that too, but it's not the thing that people are going to remember from her speech.
Right. And real quick, let's talk about tonight. Michelle Obama has been a national figure for almost 2 decades at this point. Tim Walz has been a national figure about 2 weeks. He's given a speech tonight that's really going to define himself to a lot of Americans paying attention to him for the first time. What do you think is important for Tim Walz to do tonight when he speaks?
Well, Tim Walz is there in a way like a spouse is for a presidential candidate, to sort of make them, be the testifier for that person, and to appeal to groups who maybe would have been skeptical of Kamala Harris. He's somebody of the Midwest. He, is the governor of Minnesota, but he's also grew up in rural Nebraska. Kamala Harris grew up in San Francisco. That's a very different upbringing. Certainly the idea of San Francisco liberal has become a big political, cudgel that Republicans have used. So he's there to really say, again, we're not that radical. We're joyful. We're going into this as a ticket that is looking to the future. Here are the Democratic values that we want to show that are also different from what Donald Trump is putting forward.
And you've seen Kamala Harris especially repeatedly refer to his time coaching high school football, calling him Coach Walz over and over, even though it's been a pretty long time since he was a coach. But the party's, I guess, once a coach, always a coach. Your dad would probably agree with that. But,
my dad would agree with that, although, he was a defensive coach. People liked him for that. There's some discussion about whether or not he's allowed people to think maybe he was the head coach of the state championship team, but it doesn't matter anyway. His players loved him, it seems.
And those players will be talking tonight. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back right at 9 o'clock Eastern to bring you live special coverage of the Democratic National Convention. So don't go away. Stick with us. This is special coverage from NPR News. It's live special coverage of the Democratic National Convention from NPR News. I'm Scott Detrow. It is night 3 of the DNC, and tonight is Tim Walz's night as the Minnesota governor accepts his party's nomination for vice president. Walz is a second-term governor. He was in Congress before that, but he wasn't really a national figure in politics until just a few weeks ago. And tonight's audience will certainly be the largest he has ever addressed in his life. Some of the personal introductions might make him feel right at home, though, as former students and members of the football team he once coached take the stage to talk about him. We're going to hear from party leaders tonight as well, the current and former speakers of the House, Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi. Later on, we're going to hear from former President Bill Clinton, and we will even get a surprise guest who is not a surprise anymore, I guess, because we know who it is. It's Oprah Winfrey here in Chicago. And Democrats will party like it's 1999 at one point tonight with a Prince tribute in the program in order to honor Walz's Minnesota roots. Stay with us. A lot to take in and talk about tonight. I'm going to say hi to the correspondents who will walk us through it all. From the United Center in Chicago, we have national political correspondent Mara Liasson, as well as White House correspondent Asma Khalid. Mara, I'm going to start with you for a question, but Asma, it feels important for me to point out that the stage is currently speaking to our generation, and Kenan Thompson is addressing the convention. But
right, an appeal. I mean, this is, look, broadly a very different convention than the convention some Democrats were planning just a few weeks ago.
Absolutely. And Kenan is part of it. But Mara, let's start with you. This convention so far has focused on building up energy and hype behind Harris and Walz's people. We have heard their life stories. We have met their families. We have also heard a lot about the general values of the Democratic Party as they want to define it. Not a lot about the specific policies of these two people, though. Should we expect to hear some of that tonight and tomorrow, or no?
I think only in a very glancing way. Generally, if a candidate is going to focus on policy, roll out a detailed policy agenda, they would have done it before the convention. Bill Clinton made that a kind of calling card for him. Certainly Hillary Clinton did. But Kamala Harris has made a choice, a conscious choice, to keep things broad. Her critics would say vague. She has rolled out some policy ideas, how she's going to help middle-class families buy homes, how she's going to help bring prices down, but she hasn't been very specific. And a lot of her critics, even ones that are favorable to the Democrats, have said that what she's put out is economic gibberish. But you're not going to hear that tonight. I think this is going to be about introducing Tim Walz, and you're going to hear Bill Clinton, one of the most gifted retail politicians of his generation, do what he does best, which is tell people why they should feel okay about voting for Democrats. He's done that for his entire career, and he's going to try to do it for Kamala Harris tonight.
Asma, let's talk more about how Walz ended up on the ticket with Kamala Harris. What do we know about the selection process, other than the fact that it was incredibly sped up due to the fact that she had only been the party's nominee for a matter of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. This was an incredibly quick process. Everything was condensed significantly. But I would point out that Governor Walz and Harris do have a bit of history. I mean, the vice president has done a number of events with different governors, and they go back. And you know, I think when she's been asked about choosing him, she talks about his sort of clear moral compass, the ability that she thinks he has to speak to a different demographic of the Democratic Party. And that's what Democrats are really hoping he's able to do, that he is this validator. But again, to your point, it was a very condensed process, and I would argue that a lot of folks here in the room, but certainly Democrats I've even seen out in the country, when he's out there, he's not a really known commodity on the national stage. And so, you know, people talk about Kamala Harris introducing or reintroducing herself to the public. I would argue Tim Walz is spending a lot of time introducing himself as well to the public.
Sure, and we all talk about the fact that the running mate often does not matter at all in voters' minds, but we've also seen for the last month or so J.D. Vance on the Republican side creating a lot of negative headlines for the Trump campaign that they probably were not hoping to get out of their vice presidential candidate. So it can have an effect on the conversation.
Yeah. And that being said, though, Scott, I mean, I will say that if you compare J.D. Vance's rollout after the Republican convention to Tim Walz's, it's been a remarkably different storyline. I mean, you saw Harris and Walz go out and do these massive massive rallies across the country. In fact, I was out with them yesterday in Milwaukee at the very same site where Donald Trump accepted the Republican nomination just last month. And what you heard from Tim Walz and Kamala Harris was a real sense of camaraderie and teamwork. They are campaigning across the country together. And I think he's able to say certain things that she doesn't always say. Like he controlled Trump, which he did last night about the sizes of crowds in a way that you're not necessarily going to hear as much from the nominee or the presidential nominee, I should say.
There were a few trolls of Trump along those lines throughout the convention last night. Quick question to Mara, because I know we're going to go to Hakeem Jeffries in a moment. Mara, one of the negative headlines that Walz has generated is a lot of criticism from Vance and other Republicans about the timing of his career in the National Guard. He served in it for decades.
Right.
He left his unit just before it deployed to Iraq. Do you think that's the sort of thing that he'll want to frame and talk about on his own terms in his speech tonight, or leave that to an eventual interview or something like that?
I am sure that he will talk about his National Guard service tonight. Exactly how he'll confront those criticisms, I'm not sure. He has been criticized for this before. This isn't new. He served, I think, for 24 years. He put in his papers to retire a couple months before his unit got the orders to deploy to Iraq. But there was a lot of talk that they probably would be sent. But he did serve for a very long time. He didn't do anything illegal or against the rules of the Guard, but he's being accused by J.D. Vance and the Trump campaign that somehow he deserted his men. But,
which has really stood out for a few different reasons. It stood out because the attacks on the Democratic ticket have been so scattershot, and that seems to be the one thing that Vance and Trump and other Republicans have repeatedly returned to in recent weeks. So it's kind of stood out in that way as well.
There is one thing. There is one thing that Walz has, quote, clarified, which is at one point he was talking about banning assault weapons. He said they have no place in domestic life. They're a weapon of war, like I carried, quote, in war. Mm-hmm. He has said now that he should have said that I carried in wartime, or, you know, that phrasing was not exactly accurate.
Yeah, he was deployed overseas, but not to a war.
Because he never saw combat, basically.
Right.
Yes, as J.D. Vance was, deployed overseas, but never saw combat.
Right. We are going to, it seems like we're going to hear from Hakeem Jeffries in a minute. I should point out I gave him an unintentional promotion before. I said he was a House Speaker. He would very much like to be a House Speaker. He is currently House Minority Leader, but the storyline of the race for the House is one that's getting a lot of attention this election cycle as well, even though the presidential campaign gets the bulk of it, because it's a pretty tight margin, and Democrats feel, Domenico, like, especially with Harris at the top of the ticket instead of Biden, they have a chance to flip the House.
I mean, that would be a huge deal if Democrats are able to pick up the House. It would be a really odd situation where Democrats are seen as underdogs to hold the Senate, which they only have by a seat at this point, and yet do have this possibility of picking up the House. I think it's the first time they would ever go in that direction where, it would have that kind of a split. So it would be a huge deal if Democrats are able to do that. And part of that is the messaging. This is the biggest audience that the Democratic Party is going to have for some time, to be able to talk to those swing voters who really are crucial in being able to pick up the House and being able to have a message that's right up Tim Walz's lane to be able to win over those kinds of voters is crucial for them.
Domenico, I'm realizing I didn't fully introduce you. I just called you Domenico. To me, you're like a one-name person,
right?
like Beyonce.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and I think to most of our political listeners and viewers, you're the same. But senior political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro. And that being said, we're now going to go down to the floor and listen in on Hakeem Jeffries.
Your next Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries.
Good evening, Democrats. It's a high honor and a distinct privilege as a Brooklynite, New Yorker, and as an American to stand before you today and unequivocally express my support for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to be the next president and vice president of the United States of America. Over the last few years, House Democrats have been hard at work, and we could not have asked for a better leader to partner with than President Joseph Robinette Biden, who will go down as one of the most consequential presidents of all time. Last month, President Biden selflessly passed the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, who is ready, willing, and able to fight for the people. Kamala Harris is a courageous leader, a compassionate leader, and a common sense leader who will deliver real results for everyday Americans. Kamala Harris is fighting for our freedom. Kamala Harris is fighting for our families. Kamala Harris is fighting for our future. Together, let's make Kamala Harris the 47th President of the United States of America. In our great country, when you work hard and play by the rules, you deserve to earn a living wage. You deserve to have an affordable place to call home. You deserve to educate your children in a great public school that is free from gun violence. And you deserve high-quality, affordable health care, and you deserve the chance to one day retire with grace and with dignity. But for far too many people in our great country, they are struggling to live paycheck to paycheck. And as a result, the American dream is out of reach. Here's the thing. Extreme MAGA Republicans don't care about everyday Americans. They only care about themselves. Our approach, led by Kamala Harris and Coach Walz, is very different. We care about you, the American people. And we will fight hard to make sure that the American dream is alive and well in every single community. Now, the road ahead will not be easy, which brings me to you-know-who. Donald Trump is like an old boyfriend who you broke up with, but he just won't go away. He has spent the last 4 years spinning the block, trying to get back into a relationship with the American people. Bro, we broke up with you for a reason.
That, with quite the analogy, is House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Going back throughout this convention, you've heard Democrats kind of reframing Donald Trump's presence on the American scene in kind of day-to-day life relatable ways. Last night, according to Barack Obama, he was a neighbor who blows the leaf blower every day. Today, according to Hakeem Jeffries, he's an ex-boyfriend who keeps circling your block. Going to shift gears, I guess, a little bit from that and go back to the United Center and talk to Minnesota Senator Tina Smith. Smith is a Democrat, also the former Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota. Senator Smith, welcome to the show.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Hey there, Senator Smith. Can you hear me? All right, going to try one more time to see if the connection's working. Senator Smith, are you able to hear us and talk to us?
I hear you great.
Oh, okay. Thanks for joining us. I was especially excited to talk to you because a lot of people are going to be tuning in to meet Tim Walz for the first time tonight. You have known him for 2 decades. Who is the Tim Walz that you know personally? What should people know about him?
Well, I know a lot of Americans are going to be really getting to know him for the first time, but the thing I would say is the Tim that you're going to see tonight is exactly the Tim that I've seen like in the backyard when he came over for dinner. This is a man who is, he is what he is. He takes his work really seriously, but he doesn't take himself so seriously, and I think that's why people are really kind of connecting with him because of just... He's kind of a normal guy, and let's be honest, a lot of people in politics sound like they came out of a talking points machine, and Tim Walz sounds like the guy that you might be talking to on the edge of the soccer game where your kids are playing.
Given that, if somebody had told you when you first started working with him and meeting him that he'd be the party's nominee for vice president at one point, would you have thought, that's wild, that's crazy, or, yeah, that makes sense?
Well, honestly, I would never in a million years have thought that this would have happened. And certainly to think that he would be running for vice president with Kamala Harris is just incredible. And I bet if you asked Tim Walz that question, he would say exactly the same thing. When I first met Tim, he was telling us all that he was getting ready to run for Congress in Minnesota's 1st District, which had not had a Democrat representing them for nearly 100 years. And we all were we kind of said, oh, that's so nice, good luck, it's really good to run, the kind of things that you say to somebody who you don't think has a chance.
Yeah.
And of course, he won that race and he held that seat. I think that we wouldn't have never expected this.
What do you think he brings to the ticket? And I should also ask, were you making any direct calls to the Harris campaign saying you should check this guy out? What was the case you were making when people were asking you during the incredibly squished down period of VP speculation in this campaign?
Well, it was so intense, and I definitely spoke with folks on the vetting committee to let them know what I saw as Tim's strengths. I also felt that the vice president had a really important decision to make, and I didn't want to be lobbying her publicly, understanding, of course, that for her, the issue of the relationship that the two of them could have would be so important. What I said to them is what I really believe, that the fact that he brings both executive and legislative experience, that he understands what it's like to come from small towns and the middle of the country that a lot of folks see as flyover country, and that's why people who live there feel like they are kind of ignored or looked down on. That he's a person who is equally comfortable in a Legion Hall, talking to veterans, or in a boardroom in some of our big cities. He's just able to make connections with people. And the other thing I say is that this is a man who's used to working with very strong women. And I hope that my two friends would find some really great common ground, and I think that's happening.
When you look at the finalists for the vice presidential spot, the other two finalists, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Mark Kelly of Arizona, are more moderate than Walz is. And you've seen the Trump campaign really latch on to that, saying this was the liberal pick of Kamala Harris's options, especially focusing on the slate of bills he signed into the law in his second term as governor. What is Tim Walz's appeal to moderate voters, especially thinking just over the border, the western Wisconsin voters who Democrats need to do a little bit better than they've done the last few election cycles?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And what I say when people ask me that question is look at what he was able to accomplish working with a very, very narrow Democratic majority in Minnesota. So he had to work across party lines in order to get that agenda accomplished. And was it so, radical? I don't think so. We're talking about making sure that every kid has a good meal so that they can learn in school. We're talking about making childcare more affordable. We're talking about providing no more than $25 insulin. Now, these are American goals. They are not progressive or liberal goals exclusively. So I think when you unpack what they were able to accomplish, you'll see that it was what people want, what people in Minnesota wanted. And, I could throw in there, he also managed to pass one of the largest tax cuts in Minnesota history as well as part of that. So, we have these labels, and I think what I look at is what people are really looking for. I think they want results, and that's what Tim delivers.
We got about 30 seconds or so until former President Bill Clinton, but Senator Smith, I want to ask you something I asked Mara Liasson. Do you think that Governor Walz needs to talk about his time in the National Guard, the timing of his departure from the National Guard tonight in his speech, given all of the Republican attacks on him for that particular timing?
I saw Tim earlier today, and I know he will be talking about his service in the National Guard, which he's very proud of. And these are old attacks that were leveled against him when he was running before in Minnesota, and the Minnesota voters took a look at them and said, this isn't meaningful, this is just a partisan attack, and I suspect that American voters are going to decide the same thing.
Senator Smith, are you excited about the mini Prince concert that we're going to get tonight, the Prince tribute? I feel like I need to ask you that as a Minnesotan before I let you go.
Absolutely. Last night we announced our roll call to the strains of Purple Rain, so we are always excited to hear Prince in the Minnesota delegation.
That is Senator Tina Smith. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Scott.
And we are waiting to hear from former President Bill Clinton. Not sure of the exact timing of that, but Domenico, as we wait for Clinton to walk out on the stage, he's somebody who's been giving big speeches at conventions for decades now, and I'm now hearing him introduced, so I'll just wait for that thought after Bill Clinton's speech. Here's Bill Clinton, the 42nd president of the United States. Clinton making his way to the stage. USA signs, blue and red USA signs are the signs of choice in the crowd right now. Clinton wearing a blue tie, taking in the scene here, looking over the crowd, waving. Here he is, former President Bill Clinton, who is known to go off script in convention speeches. We'll see if he does tonight. A little bit more cheers for Clinton, actually. And here it sounds like the speech is getting started.
Thank you. Whoa. Let me ask you something. After the last 2 days, aren't you proud to be a Democrat? And I am very grateful to the Republicans and independents that have joined us, have been up here on the stage, and I hope they feel better about it now. Because I've seen all these things that even I have to be reminded of from time to time when I get my spirits down. I love seeing the Obamas here. I love seeing President Biden. And I thought Hillary gave a great speech, too. And I love seeing all these young leaders. A bunch of them are coming up after me. They look better, they sound better, and they'll be exciting. I do want to say one word about President Biden. Remember, he had an improbable turn that made him president. And we were in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crash. He healed our sick and put the rest of us back to work. And he strengthened our alliances for peace and security. He stood up for Ukraine. He's trying desperately to get a ceasefire in the Middle East. And then he did something that's really hard for a politician to do. He voluntarily gave up political power. And George Washington knew that, and he did it. And he set the standard for us serving 2 terms before it was mandatory. It helped his legacy, and it will enhance Joe Biden's legacy. And it's a stark contrast to what goes on in the other party. So I want to thank him for his courage, compassion, his class, his service, his sacrifice. Joe Biden, thank you. And he kept the faith, and he's infected a lot of the rest of us. Now let's cut to the chase. I am too old to gild the lily. 2 days ago, I turned 78, the oldest man in my family of 4 generations. And the only personal vanity I want to assert is I'm still younger than Donald Trump. Last night, in what I thought was a very moving series of episodes, we nominated Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And just think about that. Two leaders with all-American but still improbable life stories. It could only happen here. Their careers, after all, started in community courtrooms and classrooms. Two leaders who spent a lifetime getting the good job done. Now, one of the things that I've noticed over my increasingly long life is that a presidential election is unique in several ways. First of all, it's the greatest job interview for the greatest job in the world. Secondly, the Constitution says we, the people, get to do the hiring. And the third thing is that every 4 years, we get to change the requirements for the job. So here's what I'm thinking, because I try to apply this in every election. Will this president take us backward or forward? Will this president give our kids a brighter future? Depends. Will this president bring us together or tear us apart? Will the president increase the peace, security, and stability and freedom that we enjoy and extend it to others as we can? We, the people, we have to make a decision about these kind of questions. And every 4 years, it's a little different because the people come at the candidates, and they say, as they're saying now, here are our problems, solve them. Here are our opportunities, seize them. Here are our fears, ease them. Here are our dreams, help them come true. A president can answer that call by saying, I'll do my part, but you have to help me. We have to work together. Or you can dodge what needs to be done by dividing, distracting, and diverting us. So in 2024, we got a pretty clear choice, it seems to me. Kamala Harris for the people, and the other guy who's proved even more than the first go-around that he's about me, myself, and I. I know which one I like better for our country. Kamala Harris will work to solve our problems, seize our opportunities, ease our fears, and make sure every single American, however they vote, has a chance to chase their dreams. You know, when she was young, she worked at McDonald's. And she greeted every person with that 1,000-watt smile and said, "How can I help you?" Now she's at the pinnacle of power, and she's still asking, "How can I help you?" I'll be so happy when she actually enters the White House as president because she will break my record as the president who spent the most time at McDonald's. Now, but we got an election to win. And remember, we've got a guy that's pretty good at what he does. Donald Trump has been a paragon of consistency. He's still dividing, he's still blaming, he's still belittling other people. He creates chaos, and then he sort of curates it as if it were precious art. Let me say, not a single day goes by, even though I've been gone for well over 23 years from the White House, not a day goes by that I don't thank the Lord for the chance I had to serve and what it meant. And one of the reasons, thank you. Wait. One of the reasons I love the job so much is that in the toughest times, even on the darkest days, if you tried hard enough, there was always something good you could do for somebody else. Now, some days that's not easy to do. You've got to deal with all these emergencies, or there's something going on here, there, or yonder. But Kamala Harris is the only candidate in this race who has the vision, the experience, the temperament, the will, and yes, the sheer joy to get something done. I mean, look, what does her opponent do with his voice? He mostly talks about himself, right? So the next time you hear him, don't count the lies. Count the eyes. Count the eyes. His vendettas, his vengeance, his complaints, his conspiracies. He's like one of those tenors opening up before he walks out on stage, like I did, trying to get his lungs open by singing, me, 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 me. When Kamala Harris is president, every day will begin with you, 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 you. So, we got to ask ourselves the questions if we're going to hire a president. Do you want to build a strong economy from the bottom up and the middle out? Or do you want to spend the next 4 years talking about crowd size? You're going to have a hard time believing this, but so help me, I triple-checked it. Since the end of the Cold War in 1989, America has created about 51 million new jobs. I swear I checked this 3 times. Even I couldn't believe it. What's the score? Democrats 50, Republicans 1. I'm glad that we've got a championship-winning coach on our team. But even the most limited of us in what we know about football or any other sport knows that if you're got 50 and the other side's got 1, you're ahead. What about affordable housing? It's a terrible problem in America now. We need more. And affordable health care. That's why the Democrats put a limit on monthly payments for insulin and a $2,000 a year out-of-pocket limit, and are trying to cover more drugs by bargaining for prices. We need more financing for small businesses. We need still to strengthen our alliances. I almost croaked in the first debate of this election season when President Trump said nobody respected America anymore like they did when he was president. Wait. And with a straight face. Look, you got to give him. He's a good actor. With a straight face, he cited as evidence of the respect that existed for us when he was there the presidents of North Korea and Russia. I'd rather have the people who respect us now. And one of the things is when you send a signal to the other countries, you want them to know whether they agree with you or not, at least that you're on the level. Here's where you are and what you believe. What are they supposed to make to these endless tributes to the late, great Hannibal Lecter? I mean, President Obama once gave me the great honor of saying I was the explainer-in-chief. Folks, I've thought about it, and I don't know what to say. Like Hakeem Jeffries, I too want an America that's more joyful, more inclusive, more future-focused. Just think what a burden it's been on us to get up day after day after day after day, buried in meaningless hot rhetoric, when there's so many opportunities out there, so many problems that need to be solved. I want that. And that's the America Kamala Harris will lead. And she's already made her first presidential decision, and she knocked it out of the park when she asked Governor Tim Walz to be her nominee for vice president. As they used to say when I was a young man growing up in Arkansas, you do not have to be all broke out with brilliance. You just look at Tim Walz, listen to him, follow his record as a teacher, as a coach, in the National Guard, as a congressman, where he was the only Democrat, save one, elected in that district in more than 100 years. And he stayed a long time. And then he became a great governor. And by all accounts, he was a crack shot who had the courage among his rural constituents to say, we do not need these assault weapons available to people who can kill our kids in school. So, armed with her first decision, Kamala Harris confronts an interesting dilemma. We're going to walk out of here feeling pretty good, I think. We've got energy, we are happy, we feel like a load's off our shoulders. And we know we're just being asked to fight the same fight that the forces of progress have had to fight for 250 years. In the face of stiff and often violent opposition, we have to find a way to go forward together, where we the people make our union more perfect. So, that's a good thing. How could we possibly lose? Kamala Harris has fought for kids her whole life that were left out and left behind. She's taken on gangs trafficking across the border. She's fought to protect the rights of homeowners. She's been our leader in the fight for reproductive freedoms, and we know a majority of the American people are with us on that. And she's gained an invaluable amount of experience as vice president, advancing our values and interests around the world. She's already said she's going to work really hard to make sure that no American working full-time lives in poverty or has to worry about their children living in poverty. She says that we got to make home ownership an achievable dream for everyone, not just a privilege. She said that and this meant a lot to me, that she would protect everybody's right to vote, whether or not they voted for her. They were citizens and they deserve the right to vote. The other day, her opponent implied that as his people voted one more time, they'd be able to rig it from now on and they wouldn't have to vote again. You think they're kidding, but I know a lot of these folks, and most of them are really good people, but some of them think that they are bound to dominate America politically, economically, and socially, and they have to use politics to do it, and they should rig the system. I don't believe that. And so here's what I want to tell you. We've seen more than one election slip away from us when we thought it couldn't happen, when people got distracted by phony issues or overconfident. This is a brutal, tough business. I want you to be happy. One of the reasons that President-to-be Harris is doing so well is that we're all so happy. But you should never underestimate your adversary. And these people are really good at distracting us, at triggering doubt, at triggering buyer's remorse. As the Obama said so eloquently last night, they are human, you know. They're bound to make a mistake now and then. We got to be tough. And so, as somebody who spends a lot of time in small towns and rural areas in New York and Arkansas and other places, I urge you to talk to all your neighbors. I urge you to meet people where they are. I urge you not to demean them, but not to pretend you don't disagree with them if you do. Treat them with respect, just the way you'd like them to treat you. Ask for their help and then follow our leader, Kamala, and ask them, how can I help you? We Democrats right now have a lot of hay in the barn. We've got massive achievements, massive advances, but there's still a lot of slips between today and Election Day that we have to navigate. And so I want to say this from the bottom of my heart. I have no idea how many more of these I'll be able to come to. I started in '76, and I've been to every one since. But no, 72. Lord, I'm getting old. But here's what I want you to know. If you vote for this team, if you can get them elected and let them bring in this breath of fresh air, you will be proud of it for the rest of your life. Your children will be proud of it. Your grandchildren will be proud of it. Take it from a man who once had the honor to be called in this convention the man from hope. We need Kamala Harris, the president of joy, to lead us. So, I'll be doing my part, you do yours. I'll see you when we're making a real joyful noise when the votes are counted. God bless you, and God bless America.
That is former President Bill Clinton. He was scheduled for 12 minutes. I don't think anybody thought that was going to happen with Bill Clinton and the way that he gives speeches at conventions. Mara Liasson, interesting emotional moment toward the end where Bill Clinton at 78 seemed to acknowledge this might be one of the last times he's given a big speech at a convention like this. What did you hear?
Well, you know, that's probably true, although Bill Clinton has often worked the theme of his own mortality into his speeches. I remember him saying over and over again, I have more yesterdays than tomorrows. So this is a theme for him. He was very avuncular. He was a little wistful, I thought, but he, even though he's clearly getting older and slowing down a bit, he gave a real Bill Clinton speech, explained what we have to think about, what he said you have to think about in this election, why it's important, and why the big theme was Trump only cares about himself, and you could hear the parentheses, and his rich friends. Kamala Harris cares about you. Yeah. Trump is me, myself, and I. Kamala Harris is for the people. And he developed those themes, and he said, I'm going to be out there doing my part, and you should too.
Domenico made a good point that Bill Clinton was one of the first high-profile speakers to really lean in toward the end to the historic nature of Kamala Harris's campaign for the presidency, which is something that you have said there's a lot of strategic reasons to talk about issues, to talk about other stuff. But Clinton made that point there, appealing to history, saying this is a vote your kids, your grandkids would be proud of.
Yes, but I don't think that he was only saying they will be proud of the fact that you helped elect the first black Asian woman president. I think he was talking about all the things that Kamala Harris will do and the things that not electing Donald Trump will save America from. But
Mara, Nancy
I think
Pelosi.
what's so interesting to me is
I'm going to go down to Nancy Pelosi, who has loomed large over the Democratic Party in recent weeks, playing a key role behind the scenes and urging President Joe Biden to step aside. Nancy Pelosi, no longer House Speaker, no longer the leader of the Democrats in the House, but somebody who has enormous clout within the party. There have been people at the convention this week with Godfather pins with Pelosi on the pin with that font. Let's listen to former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Hello, Maryland. Hello, Democrats. On January 20th, 2021, with the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we established one of the most successful presidencies of modern times. And we quickly proved that Democrats deliver. Millions of jobs, stronger infrastructure and rural broadband, a Biden child tax credit, rescuing human pensions, honoring our veterans, bold climate action, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, all thanks to President Biden's patriotic vision of a fairer America, doing so with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Joe. And I know that Vice President Harris is ready to take us to new heights. I've known Kamala Harris for decades. Personally, I know her a person of deep faith, which is reflected in her community care and service. Officially, she is a leader of strength and wisdom and eloquence on policy, most recently demonstrated fighting for women's right to choose. Politically, she is astute and strategic in winning difficult elections, quickly securing the nomination with dignity and grace, and choosing Tim Walz as our vice president. I had the honor of serving with Tim for 12 years in the Congress. He united Democrats, Republicans, and independents to turn a red district blue. He showed courage when he came to Congress in voting for the Affordable Care Act, meeting the needs of his constituents despite Republicans' lies and misrepresentation. When he went home, won the election, he returned to Congress. He fought for our Americans' heroes as the Democratic leader of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you, Tim. January 6th was a perilous moment for our democracy. Never before had a president of the United States so brazenly assaulted the bedrock of our democracy, so gleefully embraced political violence, so willfully betrayed his oath of office. Let us not forget who assaulted democracy on January 6th. He did. But let us not forget who saved democracy that day. We did. And thank God we had a Democratic House of Representatives then. We returned to the Capitol that very same night. We insisted on certifying the election results on the floors of the House and the Senate. And we demonstrated to America and to the world that American democracy prevailed. The parable of January 6th reminds us that our democracy is only as strong as the courage and commitment of those entrusted with its care. And we must choose leaders who believe in free and fair elections, who respect the peaceful transfer of power. The choice couldn't be clearer. Those leaders are Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. When the sun rose on January 7th, as our national anthem declares, we gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Now, in this election, we are called upon to do the same, to stand together, to reject autocracy, to choose democracy, and we will do so by electing a Democratic House with Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House, electing a Democratic Senate, electing Tim Walz as Vice President of the United States, and electing Kamala Harris as the President of the United States. Onward to victory!
It's former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking to the Democratic Convention. I'm going to bring in senior White House correspondent Tamara Keith. And Tam, other than Joe Biden and probably Kamala Harris, feels safe to say that Nancy Pelosi has the most power in the Democratic Party right now, as evidenced by the way that she played a key role in getting Biden to step aside. Perhaps my point was so profound that Tam was just sitting there.
Can you hear me?
Or perhaps we're having a connection issue.
I
But
didn't
Tam,
hear my name.
Tam, hello.
Yes. So sorry, I did not hear you say my name.
What did you
question.
get from Nancy Pelosi's speech there?
Well, she definitely was reflecting on January 6th and also talking about Tim Walz bridging partisan divides in the House. She also delivered something of a personal testimonial for Vice President Harris, saying that she is a person of faith, also a shrewd politician, which coming from Nancy Pelosi, who knows how to navigate the halls of power, was something of a compliment.
Pelosi has been doing a lot of interviews with NPR and other outlets over the last week or so because she has a memoir out now, and she has repeatedly had the same answer to the question of the role that she played in this ticket change, saying, I didn't make any calls, I received calls, I talked to people who called me concerned, but it is very clear on so many fronts how much of a role Pelosi played in creating the convention that we have right now, a convention that is nominating Kamala Harris for the presidency, not Joe Biden. And it does seem like that created some real damage with her relationship with President Biden.
Certainly what she's been saying in these interviews is that she hasn't spoken to him yet, that she hopes that he will forgive her, that she still cares very much about him. What she did during that dark 3 weeks for President Biden, when he was increasingly alone as the party's nominee, but without people backing him up, what she said after he had already firmly asserted that he wasn't quitting the race, she came out on Morning Joe, the show he watches and that basically all Democratic politicians pay attention to, and she said that he needs to make a decision after he'd already said he had decided.
Right.
And that really opened some more floodgates for other Democrats to come out and say that they thought that he should step aside. She never publicly said that he should step aside, but everything she didn't say said that that's what she wanted.
All right, Tam, we will check back in with you later tonight. I will make sure to say Tam whenever you get the question. I'll talk to you soon, Tam. We're going to shift over and bring back in Mara Eliason and Asma Khalid, who have been watching this as well. Asma, let me go to you. Any threads that you're hearing from the speaker so far? We've heard Hakeem Jeffries. We've heard Bill Clinton. We've heard Nancy Pelosi. Have you picked any threads from speaker to speaker to speaker that tell us what the story is that Democrats are trying to tell tonight?
To tell tonight, Scott, I'm not sure if I've noticed any real continuous threads from all of them. I think what they are largely trying to do is to all be validators in distinct ways towards Kamala Harris. I mean, I was struck that when Nancy Pelosi came out, one of the first things she said was that she's known Harris for a number of years and that she knows her to be a woman of faith. There is an attempt to validate her, I think, from different corners of her life, and that's what I'm hearing, in addition to the fact that, folks, as we can expect, are largely making a case against Donald Trump. The fact that this is an election that is much bigger than Harris. You heard this from Nancy Pelosi just a few moments ago, talking about this is an election where the country needs to stand together, in her words, and choose democracy. These are themes, of course, that were part of President Biden's campaign when he was running, but I think it's interesting to hear these from other speakers, because when you go out and you cover Harris, she doesn't talk a whole lot about democracy. The themes of her election have largely been about presenting a contrast, and she talks a lot about freedom and the need to move forward. But she doesn't talk extensively about democracy the way that I think we're hearing from some speakers, and certainly the way we used to hear from President Biden.
Right. Asma, I want to ask about something else that you've been doing some reporting on. This is the role of uncommitted delegates here at this convention. That roll call last night that was such a big celebratory moment for the party. There were points where you heard the people speaking for the delegates kind of awkwardly underscoring, say, X votes for Kamala Harris, and 3 people voting uncommitted. But tell us about some of these uncommitted delegates, particularly pro-Palestinian delegates, and what they are wanting to see from this convention that they're not seeing so far.
Well, one major thing that they wanted to see was a commitment that a Palestinian American voice would be represented here behind us on the main stage at the United Center. And Scott, there's been, I know, a lot of back and forth. Sources have been telling me that there were debates about doing this. Ultimately, just a bit ago, it was confirmed by a source familiar that is not going to happen, that there will not be any Palestinian Americans here speaking. And, look, I think this is a letdown to them. They wanted to have their voice represented here. There are some delegates representing that movement. I mean, they also wanted a recognition. And I think, Scott, one of the things I've been struck by is the fact that by and large, the Democratic Party is really united following Joe Biden's decision to withdraw from the race. But I would argue the one policy issue on which they are not united, the elephant in the room here, is the war in Gaza.
Right.
And to not hear that addressed in any way does frustrate some of the delegates. In fact, just a bit ago, I happened to find somebody who is uncommitted on the floor as I was coming up here from Washington State. She said it's been a tough convention for her. Will these voters ultimately line up behind Kamala Harris? Some of them say they may. Some of them are still very undecided about what to do, and they want to see, policy shifts. But beyond whether or not, Harris is really going to agree to, say, an arms embargo on Israel, which her folks say that she is not going to do, they wanted to have representation here on stage. And, Scott, one last thing I'll point out here is I think having this convention here in Chicago, as someone who grew up in the Chicagoland area, to not see any representation here is particularly acute because Chicago has the largest Palestinian American population in the country.
Yeah.
And we are seeing a lot of diversity, but that's one aspect of diversity we're not seeing here.
The other aspect, though, of having this convention in Chicago is so many Democrats were so worried that protests would overwhelm the convention, would take the headlines from the convention, would disrupt the convention, particularly when Biden was still heading the ticket. So far, that has not happened, which I think is notable, though, as you point out, a lot of these people are really important voters for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, we're not seeing the large-scale type of protests, frustration that I think was anticipated when Biden was at the top of the ticket. I was talking to David Axelrod a bit about this, I think last week, and I was asking him about some of the comparisons of 1968, but also looking at specifically Grant Park. We knew that Grant Park was going to have some of these protests. Grant Park is this really historic place in the city of Chicago. You might recall it is where Barack Obama famously spoke the night that he became president of the United States. And what David Axelrod told me, very closely connected to Barack Obama's campaign there, he said that this is a very different moment. It is a moment in which the party inside, at least, is going to be very, very united. There is momentum. He says it's a moment that's more akin to 2008 than it is to 1968.
All right, Asma, thank you so much. I'm gonna shift now to Franco Ordonez, who is also here in Chicago. Franco, you have been covering the Republican side of this election. Former President Trump held a rally today. It was his first outdoor rally since that assassination attempt that happened on the eve of the Republican convention. What was that event like?
Yeah, I mean, it was part of his counter-programming that he has been doing all week. They've had a theme each day. Today's theme was national security. He talked a lot about Afghanistan, particularly the withdrawal, and he blamed Biden and Harris for that chaotic exit that also led to the deaths of 13 service members. But what I found particularly interesting was that this was his first outdoor rally since the assassination attempt against him in Pennsylvania on July 13th. And Trump actually spoke behind bulletproof glass during the event. It was in Asheboro, North Carolina, and it was part of ramped up security measures that are going on to protect him. This is something that we've been waiting for, wondering about to see if he would return or when he would return to outdoor events and what type of measures. But he used that speech to talk about the issues, to talk about national security, also to talk about Obama. He definitely expressed some grievances about what is happening here in Chicago. He went after Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, as well as Michelle Obama. He really did not like, it's clear, some of the comments that they were making yesterday in their speeches. Particularly, he even called the former president nasty because of the speeches.
Thank you, Franco. And yeah, that big bulletproof glass was striking to see. I think a lot of people probably remember the images of Donald Trump speaking behind that glass, which the Secret Service uses when it has extra security concerns. That was the setup at that Stop the Steal rally that took place the morning of January 6th, where a lot of people went directly from that rally to the United States Capitol, and that's something that Nancy Pelosi was speaking about earlier tonight. Domenico Montanaro, I want to talk to you and get a sense, because we are about to hear from speakers in several key states to this presidential election, the states that are going to decide this election, states like Pennsylvania, states like Nevada. We're going to hear from the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. We're going to also hear from Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. What's the best way to think about Nevada right now as a competitive state for the Senate map, for the presidential map?
Nevada is always one of those states that's close, right? But Democrats have seemed in recent years, over the last 20 years, to be able to pull out a lot of close races because they have a lot of confidence in their organizing. A lot of that had to do with the former Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, the late Senate Majority Leader, who was seen to have this machine in the same way that kind of Nancy Pelosi at this convention is seen as the quote-unquote godmother. You kind of had that same sense among Harry Reid from a messaging standpoint and from a turnout standpoint.
Yeah.
Now, once Harry Reid had passed away, people were curious to see if that would continue, and it did. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this race has now closed to a place where it is essentially a tie as a toss-up race between Harris and between Trump, it's going to be one of those states that's very closely contested. The Culinary Union is a hugely important group there that has tended to help support Democrats in turning out votes. This is going to be a battleground for sure in a place where you have a really strongly blue-collar electorate, economic issues, super important, and also one of the least engaged electorates right now, the Harris campaign tells me. So I think we're going to see a lot more activity in a place like Nevada over the next couple of weeks.
You got Nevada, you got Pennsylvania, which I don't think anybody listening needs to hear about how close Pennsylvania is and how important Pennsylvania is.
One important thing to think about with Pennsylvania is for the Trump campaign, it seems to be the ball game because they have really one path, and that path is to win Pennsylvania and Georgia. Those two states combined, Trump could win those two and lose the other 5 swing states that we've been talking about and get to 270 electoral votes. It's where they're spending the most money on advertising, organizing, and they really see those as as key to the election, and why they were somewhat nervous, frankly, about someone like Josh Shapiro, the governor of the state, we're going to be hearing from tonight, as a potential vice presidential pick because he has a 60+% approval rating in the state, depending on the poll that you look at.
Yeah.
And he's somebody who, was seen as could move the state marginally by a point or two. He's certainly still pledging to do everything he possibly can for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Right, to the point where President Biden talked about hoping to go campaign with Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania as Kamala Harris and Tim Walz campaign across the whole country. Let me ask you a question about polling. No disrespect, as you say sometimes, because I know you work directly on a lot of polls.
There's always a but coming after that. So
always.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, what's coming out here? Here's my question. So much has been up in the air over the past few weeks, over this summer, and I've wondered, when do you think we'll get to a point where polls are telling us something steady that feels firm and aren't just reflective of a buzzy moment that's still a little bit fluid? Like, when are things settling, do you think?
Well, they were telling us something solid until Kamala Harris got into the race. I mean, it was this slow, sort of consistent, storyline that we were seeing with this very close race between Trump and Biden. And then after the debate on June 27th, you saw Trump pulling ahead slightly in places in the blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. He was up an average of 2 to 3 points. In the Sun Belt states of Arizona and Nevada, Georgia and North Carolina, he was up anywhere 5 to 6 points. That has radically shifted now. Just in looking at the results today for our swing state map, which I'm going to put out hopefully on Monday, Harris has now completely turned the tables. I mean, she's leading in the blue wall states. She's narrowly ahead in Arizona. She's tied in the other Sun Belt states.
And Trump's campaign will say, that's a sugar high, this is a honeymoon. Is there evidence that maybe that's not the case?
Sure. Well, the thing is, everybody usually gets a bounce out of their conventions. Donald Trump had his bounce stepped on by Joe Biden getting out of the race.
And
really
speaking of
changed the
stepping
narrative.
on, you're getting stepped on right now.
As
because Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is taking the stage. We're going to listen. Thanks, Domenico.
You got it.
Hello, Chicago. Before I was senator, I was Nevada's Attorney General. And that's when I met Kamala Harris, my colleague in California. Now, we bonded over many things. And working together, I quickly learned what kind of person she is. She is a strong leader. Here's how I know. As AGs, we took on the big banks after the foreclosure crisis. And let me tell you, Kamala did not settle for less than homeowners deserved. Her leadership helped win billions for working families nationwide. Delivering for families, that's Kamala Harris. Kamala and I also worked to protect our southern border. During that time, Kamala invited a group of AGs across the border to meet with Mexican officials. Now, we worked together to put transnational criminals and drug smugglers behind bars. Holding criminals accountable, that's Kamala Harris. Listen, and when we took on human traffickers, Kamala had us meet with survivors so that we could understand who we were fighting for. Standing up for justice, that's Kamala Harris. So trust me when I say I know she will fight for our families and our freedoms. Now, we must fight for her. Every vote matters. I know. In 2016, Nevadans elected me, the granddaughter of a baker from Mexico, to serve as the first Latina in the United States Senate. I'll tell you what. And in 2022, my reelection came down to 7,928 votes. Because of voters in Nevada, the Democrats won the Senate majority. And I'm here to tell you, We can do it again. We can send Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to the White House. Are we ready to do it? Are we ready to fight? Let's get it done, Chicago. Thank you, everyone.
That's Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. The next speaker we're going to hear from is Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who is the runner-up by all accounts in the vice presidential sweepstakes. Shapiro's a first-term governor, but he served 2 terms as Pennsylvania Attorney General, much like Kamala Harris did earlier in her career, overseeing a series of high-profile court cases that raised his national profile. Shapiro's a popular governor of probably the most important swing state on the map in this presidential election.
2.5 centuries ago in Philadelphia, a band of patriots declared their independence from a king and set ourselves on a path of self-determination. Generation after generation has embraced that responsibility. Ordinary Americans rising up, demanding more, seeking justice. And in every chapter of our American story, we've made progress and advanced the cause of freedom. Today we find ourselves writing that next chapter. Will we be a nation defined by chaos and extremism? Or will we choose a path of decency, honor, and continued progress? Kamala Harris, well, she has spent her entire career making progress. Donald Trump, a man with no guardrails, wants to take away our rights and our freedoms. And listen, while he cloaks himself in the blanket of freedom, what he's offering isn't freedom at all. Because hear me on this, it's not freedom to tell our children what books they're allowed to read. No, it's not. And it's not freedom to tell women what they can do with their bodies. And hear me on this, it sure as hell isn't freedom to say you can go vote, but he gets to pick the winner. That's not freedom. But you know what? You know what, Democrats? We are the party of real freedom. That's right. The kind of real freedom that comes when that child has a great public school with an awesome teacher because we believe in her future. Real freedom that comes when we invest in the police and in the community so that child can walk to and from school and get home safely to her mama. Real freedom that comes when she can join a union, marry who she loves, start a family on her own terms, breathe clean air, drink pure water, worship how she wants, and live a life of purpose where she is respected for who she is. Real freedom that comes when she can look at Madam President and know that this is a nation where anything and everything is possible. That is real freedom, and that is what we are fighting for. You know, Kamala and Tim's names may be on the ballot, but it's your rights. It's our rights. It's our future and freedoms that are on the line. And you have the power to shape the future of this country. Just like our ancestors who fought for freedom on the battlefield and sat in at lunch counters so our kids could stand up. Now it's on us. It's on us, my friends, to organize in our communities and on our For You pages around 3 basic American principles. We value our freedom, we cherish our democracy, and we love this country. And listen, we love this country. And listen, despite our challenges, hear me on this, I want you to know I have never been more hopeful because I see in all of you the enduring promise of America. E pluribus unum, out of many one. It's not merely a motto from the past, it's our direction for the future. You see, you all give me hope, and you all have the power. So let's use that power. Let's do the hard work necessary to win this election and write the next chapter in our American story. So are you ready to protect our rights? Are you ready to secure our freedoms? And are you ready to defend our democracy? And are you ready to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz? America, let's get to work!
That is Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro speaking to the Democratic National Convention. We had heard Senator Catherine Cortez Masto a few minutes before that. The next speaker is going to be Amanda Gorman, a young poet who really blew the roof off of President Biden's inauguration in 2021 by delivering a really stirring poem at the inaugural ceremony. She's going to read a poem here at the convention now.
We gather at this hallowed place because we believe in the American dream. We face a race that tests if this country we cherish shall perish from the earth, and if our earth shall perish from this country. It falls to us to ensure that we do not fall, for a people that cannot stand together cannot stand at all. We are one family, regardless of religion, class, or color. For what defines a patriot is not just our love of liberty, but our love for one another. This is loud in our country's call because while we all love freedom, it is love that frees us all. Empathy emancipates, making us greater than hate or vanity. That is the American promise, powerful and pure. Divided, we cannot endure, but united, we can endeavor to humanize our democracy and endear democracy to humanity. And make no mistake, cohering is the hardest task history ever wrote. But tomorrow is not written by our odds of hardship, but by the audacity of our hope, by the vitality of our vote. Only now, approaching this rare air, are we aware that perhaps the American dream is no dream at all, but instead a dare to dream together. Like a million roots tethered, branching up humbly, making one tree. This is our country from many, one, from battles won, our freedoms sung, our kingdom come has just begun. We redeem this sacred scene, ready for our journey from it. Together, we must birth this early republic and achieve an unearthly summit. Let us not just believe in the American dream, let us be worthy of it. Thank you.
That is poet Amanda Gorman delivering a poem to the convention. We're going to go now into a video that is going to set up a surprise speaker who you may have heard of before. People in Chicago may have heard of before, Oprah Winfrey, who really entered the world of politics by endorsing Barack Obama in 2008 and is going to speak about Kamala Harris's campaign tonight.
The word is called freedom. Can you tell me what it means?
Interesting. Let me think about that for a second.
The spirit of freedom.
For me? Oh, yeah. Freedom, to me, means choice.
The ability to laugh with friends.
Be who you want to be. Go where you want to go.
Living your life day to day. Having new chapters in that life.
I believe in having your own words and being able to do what you want to.
The freedom to raise our family in healthy communities.
The idea that I can turn to my partner, my husband, and say I love you with every being of my soul.
Being able to start a family when I want to, being able to, support the missions that I want to go to the church that I want to.
Not everyone has the same opportunities. But the United States is, of anywhere I've ever been, just one place where you can accomplish more.
The big, fantastic thing about America is that it is the land of opportunity. I know it sounds trite, but it's the truth.
I grew up with a single mom, and she really imbued in me these qualities that you just really have to care about your neighbors and your family and your friends.
I feel like the American dream is having opportunities, having opportunity to go to college if you want to, having opportunity to get any job you can, no matter who you are or where you come from.
The American dream is about having the ability to make choices about your medical care and do whatever you want to do with your life without anybody telling you if it's good or not.
We are in an incredible moment in history. We've seen women stripped of their most fundamental right to autonomy over their bodies.
The freedom to make choices about your body, your life, your career should be entirely in your control.
But I have found that good people want to do good things.
That you find a way to move forward under ugly and scary circumstances.
The work that lies ahead is to make America live up to its highest ideals. And, we're proud to go to work.
The work to build a better future really depends on all of us coming together.
So this is a video that the convention is playing about the idea of freedom, which is something that you've seen the Democratic ticket embrace, particularly since Kamala Harris took charge of the campaign, kind of flipping the script a little bit and trying to own the idea of freedom, saying that freedom, as you've been hearing the people in this video talk about, freedom is the absence of restrictions, the ability to make choices you want to make without the government coming after you for doing so. You've heard Harris talk about this. You've heard speakers like Tim Walz talk about this, and now there's a produced video at the convention trying to drive that point home. Still a lot of high-profile speakers that we're going to hear from tonight. Pete Buttigieg, Tim Walz, the vice presidential nominee. I'm going to go down to the convention floor now and talk to Don Gagne, who is in there with the delegates on the floor. And Don, I'm wondering, is the surprise guest known to everybody there? Are they aware that Oprah's coming out to talk in the next few minutes?
I think a lot of people are indeed aware that she is on the list of potential, perhaps even likely speakers tonight. But I can tell you from looking around, there are a lot of people who don't have the schedule of speakers, don't have the list, haven't even done a ton of homework. They know who the main speakers are leading up to vice presidential nominee Walz. But a lot of people are going to be surprised, and whether they do it or not, you can bet this place is going to break out into, a form of bedlam anyway when Oprah takes the stage.
Yeah. Who's grabbed the room so far tonight of the speakers we've heard already?
It's been an interesting evening. Last night, of course, it was, one blockbuster speech after another throughout the evening, especially, with the Obamas. But the Bill Clinton speech was more low-key, but, you can hear the cheer now. I'll throw it back to you.
I don't think you'll be offended, Don, if we go away from you to join Oprah Winfrey. Though both of you, iconic broadcasters in your own way. Here she is walking out on stage. Here's Oprah.
Good evening, everybody! Who says you can't go home again? After watching the Obamas last night, that was some epic fire, wasn't it? Some epic fire. We're now so fired up, we can't wait to leave here and do something. And what we're going to do is elect Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States. I am so honored to have been asked to speak on tonight's theme about what matters most to me, to you, and all of us Americans: freedom. There are people who want you to see our country as a nation of us against them, people who want to scare you, who want to rule you, people who'd have you believe that books are dangerous and assault rifles are safe, that there's a right way to worship and a wrong way to love, people who seek first to divide and then to conquer. But here's the thing. When we stand together, it is impossible to conquer us. In the words of an extraordinary American, the late Congressman John Lewis, he said, no matter what ship our ancestors arrived on, we are all in the same boat now. Congressman Lewis knew very well how far this country has come because he was one of the brilliant Americans who helped to get us where we are. But he also knew that the work is not done. The work will never be done because freedom isn't free. America is an ongoing project. It requires commitment. It requires being open to the hard work and the heart work of democracy. And every now and then, it requires standing up to life's bullies. I know this. I've lived in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Wisconsin, Maryland, Indiana, Florida, Hawaii, Colorado, California, and California, and sweet home Chicago, Illinois. I have actually traveled this country from the redwood forests, love those redwoods, to the Gulf Stream waters. I've seen racism and sexism and income inequality and division. I've not only seen it, at times I've been on the receiving end of it. But more often than not, what I've witnessed and experienced are human beings, both conservative and liberal, who may not agree with each other, but who'd still help you in a heartbeat if you were in trouble. These are the people who make me proud to say that I am an American. They are the best of America. And despite what some would have you think, we are not so different from our neighbors. When a house is on fire, we don't ask about the homeowner's race or religion. We don't wonder who their partner is or how they voted. No, we just try to do the best we can to save them. And if the place happens to belong to a childless cat lady, well, we try to get that cat out too. Because we are a country of people who work hard for the money. We wish our brothers and sisters well, and we pray for peace. We know all the old tricks and tropes that are designed to distract us from what actually matters, but we are beyond ridiculous tweets and lies and foolery. These are complicated times, people, and they require adult conversation. And I welcome those conversations because civilized debate is vital to democracy, and it is the best of America. Now, over the last couple of nights, we have all seen brave people walk onto this stage and share their most private pain. Amanda and Josh, Caitlin, Hadley, they told us their stories of rape and incest and near-death experiences from having the state deny them the abortion that their doctor explained was medically necessary. And they've told us these things for one reason, and that is to keep what happened to them from happening to anybody else. Because if you do not have autonomy over this, if you cannot control when and how you choose to bring your children into this world and how they are raised and supported, there is no American dream. The women and men who are battling to keep us from going back to a time of desperation and shame and stone-cold fear, they are the new freedom fighters. And make no mistake, they are the best of America. I want to talk now about somebody who's not with us tonight. Tessie Prevost Williams was born in New Orleans, not long after the Supreme Court ruled that segregated public schools were unconstitutional. That was in 1954, same year I was born. But I didn't have to head to first grade at the all-white McDonough 19 school with a U.S. Marshal by my side like Tessie did. And when I got to school, the building wasn't empty like it was for Tessie. You see, rather than allowing McDonough to be integrated, parents pulled their kids out of the school, leaving only Tessie and two other little black girls, Gail Etienne and Leona Tate, to sit in a classroom with the windows papered over to block snipers from attacking their 6-year-old bodies. Tessie passed away 6 weeks ago. And I tell this story to honor her tonight because she like Ruby Bridges and her friends, Leona and Gail, the New Orleans Four they were called. They broke barriers and they paid dearly for it. But it was the grace and guts and courage of women like Tessie Prevost Williams that paved the way for another young girl who 9 years later became part of the second class to integrate the public schools in Berkeley, California. And it seems to me that at school and at home, somebody did a beautiful job of showing this young girl how to challenge the people at the top and empower the people at the bottom. They showed her how to look at the world and see not just what is, but what can be. They instilled in her a passion for justice and freedom and the glorious fighting spirit necessary to pursue that passion. And soon, and very soon, very soon, we're going to be teaching our daughters and sons about how this child of an Indian mother and a Jamaican father, two idealistic, energetic immigrants, how this child grew up to become the 47th President of the United States. The best of America. You know, let me tell you this. This election isn't about us and them. It's about you and me, and what we want our futures to look like. There are choices to be made when we cast our ballot. Now, there's a certain candidate that says if we just go to the polls this one time, that we'll never have to do it again. Well, you know what? You're looking at a registered independent who's proud to vote again and again and again because I'm an American and that's what Americans do. Voting is the best of America. And I have always, since I was eligible to vote, I've always voted my values. And that is what is needed in this election now more than ever. So I'm calling on all you independents and all you undecideds. You know this is true. You know I'm telling you the truth, that values and character matter most of all. In leadership and in life. And more than anything, you know this is true, that decency and respect are on the ballot in 2024. And just plain common sense. Common sense tells you that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz can give us decency and respect. They're the ones that give it to us. So, we are Americans. We are Americans. Let us choose loyalty to the Constitution over loyalty to any individual. Because that's the best of America. And let us choose optimism over cynicism, because that's the best of America. And let us choose inclusion over retribution. Let us choose common sense over nonsense. Because that's the best of America. And let us choose the sweet promise of tomorrow over the bitter return to yesterday. We won't go back. We won't be set back, pushed back, bullied back, kicked back. We're not going back. Not going back. We're not going back. So, let us choose. Let us choose truth. Let us choose honor. And let us choose joy. Because that's the best of America. But more than anything else, let us choose freedom. Why? Because that's the best of America. We're all Americans, and together, let's all choose Kamala Harris. Thank you, Chicago.
That was Oprah Winfrey. This is live special coverage from NPR News.
Support for NPR's elections coverage comes from Saatva, committed to making handcrafted mattresses that help lull people to sleep and keep them sleeping soundly. More information is at saatva.com/NPR. And from Hiscox, committed to helping small businesses protect their dreams. Quotes and information on customized insurance for specific risks are available at hiscox.com. Hiscox, business insurance experts.
Why is bluegrass growing in the desert? Where do bridges rise to cross borders? How do old streets turn new corners? When do 300 million people know the same loss?
Who say they are exhausted on the front lines of the pandemic.
When can we share the same victory?
The launch of James Webb.
It's when we commit to listen. The NPR network is listener-supported, independent journalism in communities around the country. It amplifies more voices, more journalists, more movements, more Americas, and takes all of us on new journeys. It takes all of us closer to home. It takes all of us.
This is live special coverage of the Democratic National Convention from NPR News. I'm Scott Detrow. We're going to go back to the convention floor where Maryland Governor Wes Moore is walking out on stage and is set to address the convention. Moore is the first-term governor of Maryland, seen as a rising star of the party.
Thank you. Thank you. On March 26th, at 1:30 in the morning, a container ship the length of 3 football fields slammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, and the bridge collapsed. A port that drives 13% of our state's economy was now closed. Thousands of workers were hours away from waking up and realizing they no longer had a job. 6 Marylanders who had been on the bridge in the middle of the night fixing potholes lost their lives. And one of the first phone calls that I got that morning started with these 3 words. Gov, it's Kamala. She said, I know you spoke to the president, and I want you to know we are here with you every step of the way. . Now, I joined the Army when I was 17. In fact, I was too young to sign the paperwork. I had to ask my mom to sign the paperwork for me because I don't have bone spurs. I led soldiers in combat in Afghanistan. And my training taught me that you never learn anything about anybody when times are easy. You learn everything you need to know about somebody when times are hard and when the temperature gets turned up. And America, I saw that Kamala Harris is the right one to lead in this moment firsthand. And united with the Almighty God's grace, we brought closure to the families of the 6 victims. And while many said it could take 11 months to reopen the port of Baltimore, we got it done in 11 weeks. Because that is the story of America. We are a nation of patriots who serve when the mission is hard and who serve when the destination is uncertain. And I know our history isn't perfect. The unevenness of the American journey has made some skeptical. But I'm not asking you to give up your skepticism. I just want that skepticism to be your companion and not your captor. And I'm asking that you join us in the work. Because making America great doesn't mean telling people you're not wanted. And loving your country does not mean lying about its history. Making America great means saying the ambitions of this country would be incomplete without your help. It's the legacy of those 6 workers who fixed potholes on a bridge while we slept, who were born in a different country, but who knew that America was big enough for them too. It's the journey. It's the journey of a man raised by a remarkable immigrant single mom, a man who felt handcuffs on his wrists at 11 years old, who now stands before you as the 63rd governor of Maryland and the first black governor in the history of our state. It's the story of a prosecutor who defended our freedoms and had Maryland's back when we needed it most. And now, MVP, we've got your back as well. That's right. It's my fellow veteran, my brother, and the next Vice President of the United States, Tim Walz. And now, Tim knows that in the military, you count the days towards mission completion. So guess what, y'all? We have got 75 days and a wake-up until Election Day. 75 days in a wake-up for us to prove what Americans can do when the pressure is on. 75 days and a wake-up for us to show that true patriots do not whine and complain. We put our heads down and we get to work. 75 days and a wake-up to build a future that those who came before us hope for, and those who come after us that they deserve. And 75 days and a wake-up to elect a leader who is willing to believe in the best of us, and that leader is Kamala Harris, the next president of the United States. Thank you, God bless you, and let's leave no one behind.
That was Maryland Governor Wes Moore. Coming up next, we're going to listen in and watch a video that the Democrats have put together about Tim Walz's time in the National Guard. Just kidding. We're actually next going to hear from Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg,
Indiana Mayor,
who, of course, ran for president in 2020, won the Iowa caucuses, though it took a few days to figure that out. Buttigieg ended up joining Biden's administration. He's Transportation Secretary, and he's been a high-profile member of the Biden administration. Let's hear from Secretary Buttigieg.
Good evening, Democrats. Thank you, Chicago. Here's a sentence I never thought I'd hear myself saying. I'm Pete Buttigieg, and you might recognize me from Fox News. I believe in going anywhere, in service of a good cause, and friends, we gather in a very good cause, electing Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, the next president and vice president of the United States. The choice could not be clearer. Donald Trump rants about law and order, as if he wasn't a convicted criminal running against a prosecutor. As if we were going to forget that crime was higher on his watch. Talks about the forgotten man, hoping we'll forget that the only economic promise that he actually kept was to cut taxes for the rich. And don't even get me started on his new running mate. At least Mike Pence was polite. J.D. Vance is one of those guys who thinks if you don't live the life that he has in mind for you, then you don't count. Someone who said that if you don't have kids, you have, quote, no physical commitment to the future of this country. You know, Senator, when I deployed to Afghanistan, I didn't have kids then. Many of the men and women who went outside the wire with me didn't have kids either. But let me tell you, our commitment to the future of this country was pretty damn physical. Choosing a guy like J.D. Vance to be America's next vice president sends a message. And the message is that they are doubling down on negativity and grievance. Committing to a concept of campaigning best summed up in one word: darkness. Darkness is what they are selling. The thing is, I just don't believe that America today is in the market for darkness. I believe America is ready for a better kind of politics. Yes, politics at its worst can be ugly, crushing, demeaning, but it doesn't have to be. At its best, politics can be empowering, uplifting. It can even be a kind of soul craft. My faith teaches me that the world isn't made up of good people and bad people, but rather that each of us is capable of good and bad things. And I believe leaders matter because of what they bring out in each of us, the good or the bad. Right now, the other side is appealing to what is smallest within you. They're telling you that greatness comes from going back to the past. They're telling you that anyone different from you is a threat. They're telling you that your neighbor or nephew or daughter who disagrees with you politically isn't just wrong, but is now the enemy. I believe in a better politics, one that finds us at our most decent and open and brave. The kind of politics that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are offering, and as you have felt these many days, that kind of politics also just feels better to be part of. There is joy in it, as well as power. And if all of that sounds naive, let me insist that I have come to this view not by way of idealism, but by way of experience. Not just the experience of my unlikely career. Someone like me serving in Indiana, serving in Washington, serving in uniform. I'm thinking of something much more basic. I'm thinking of dinner time at our house in Michigan.
This is live special coverage from NPR News. It's the Democratic National Convention. Pete Buttigieg is speaking.
And the air fryer is beeping and the mac and cheese is boiling over. And it feels like all the political negotiating experience in the world is not enough for me to get our 3-year-old son and our 3-year-old daughter to just wash their hands and sit at the table. It's the part of our day when politics seems the most distant. And yet the makeup of our kitchen table, the existence of my family, is just one example of something that was literally impossible as recently as 25 years ago, when an anxious teenager growing up in Indiana wondered if he would ever find belonging in this world. This kind of life went from impossible to possible, from possible to real, from real to almost ordinary in less than half a lifetime. But that didn't just happen. It was brought about through idealism and courage, through organizing and persuasion and storytelling, and yes, through politics, the right kind of politics. The kind of politics that can make an impossible dream into an everyday reality. I don't presume to know what it's like in your kitchen, but I know, as sure as I am standing here, that everything in it, the bills you pay at that table, the shape of the family that sits there, the fears and the dreams that you talk about late into the night there, all of it compels us to demand more from our politics than a rerun of some TV wrestling death match. So this November, we get to choose. We get to choose our president. We get to choose our policies, but most of all, we will choose a better politics. A politics that calls us to our better selves and offers us a better everyday. That is what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz represents. That is what Democrats represent. That is what awaits us when America decides to end Trump's politics of darkness once and for all. That is what we choose when we embrace the leaders who are out there building bridges and reject the ones who are out there banning books. This is what we will work for every day to November and beyond. So let's go win this. Thank you, Democrats.
That was Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. And coming up next, we're going to listen to a video that the Democrats have put together looking at Tim Walz's career in the National Guard. It was a high point on his biography when he was first introduced as Harris's running mate, but it's something that Republicans have latched onto, attacking the timing of when he left the National Guard and some of the ways he's talked about it.
Seeing Governor Walz going to Congress and then becoming governor, I see the guy that was a first sergeant. I see a guy that's full of energy, always busy, and like he says, you get enough time to sleep when you're dead.
I first met Governor Walz and Congressman Walz when I was transitioning out of the Marine Corps, going back to school. He really wanted to know what the experience was of those that were actually using the GI Bill and how it could be improved. It seemed to be a continuation of focus on improving the lives of veterans.
Governor Walz in our unit always would say his catchphrase was, "We'll get it done," and we always did.
The way I've seen him carry himself over the years in Congress and the way he works for veterans, there's no excuse making, there's no scapegoating, it's just accomplish the mission.
Governor Walz has been that way and always will be that way.
Having Governor Walz on the House Veteran Affairs Committee was instrumental in getting the post 9/11 GI Bill not only introduced, but also passed.
When Governor Walz wants change, it'll happen. Back to the Guard. We'll get it done.
We're going to rejoin the floor in a moment. First, I'm going to quickly talk about that video with White House correspondent Tamara Keith. Tam, like I said, Republicans have really leaned into this attack on Walz. Democrats have decried those attacks as a repeat of the Swift boat attacks on John Kerry back in 2004. Any thoughts on that video and that messaging?
You know, what stands out to me about that video is that it didn't focus on his title, which is the thing that has been, an issue that Republicans have raised. It didn't even really focus on his time serving in the National Guard. It focused on his work for veterans once he was a member of Congress and governor. And there's not been much criticism of that. In fact, he has been widely praised for his work for veterans.
We'll hear how Walz talks about that in a speech tonight. People might hear the strains of Let's Go Crazy behind you, so we're going to go down. John Legend is performing Let's Go Crazy, the iconic Prince song, along with Prince's longtime collaborator, Sheila E., and they are doing this performance because Tim Walz, of course, is the governor of Minnesota.
Let's go! We're all excited, but we don't know why. Maybe it's 'cause we're all gonna die. And what if we do? Oh, what's it all for? You better live now before the grim reaper comes knocking on your door. We gonna let the LA break us down. Let's go crazy. Let's go nuts. Let's look for the purple banana till they put us in the truck. Let's go! Come on, baby. I need everybody to get nuts with me. Come on. How we on here? Come on. Let's go. Let's go! Yeah, we gonna let the elevator bring us down. Let's go! Crazy. Put your hands together. Go crazy. Come on, let's go. Now everything be alright. Make everything go wrong. Kill them, will them, that but still will kill. Hey, tough children. He's coming. He's coming. He's coming. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
John Legend and Sheila E. performing some Prince. Don Gagné down on the convention floor in the middle of all of that. Don, it's Minnesota o'clock here in night 3 of the convention at this point.
It sure is. And, you know, they've played a lot of basketball games in this arena, but they've had some concerts, too. So this isn't the first dance party that's broken out in the United Center. But it was indeed a dance party, and nowhere more so than the Minnesota delegation. Prince, of course, from Minnesota, and the vice presidential nominee as well.
Tim Walz. And I think we're going to hear from Amy Klobuchar next, the senator from Minnesota. While we wait for Klobuchar to come out, Don, we were talking before, and you were saying that it was a little bit more of a low-key night so far on the convention floor. Has that changed as the night has gone on? You heard some stirring speeches from Moore and Pete Buttigieg and others. Has the crowd gotten more amped up, or has it remained a little more low-key than last night?
I think it's fair to say it's amped up, and it really took off with Oprah Winfrey's surprise appearance. There were indeed some people surprised by that, though a lot of those had heard through the grapevine that she was coming on. And then certainly Wes Moore's speech felt like one of those big kind of speeches where somebody makes their mark on a national stage, and a lot of people in the audience, including in this room, are kind of going, oh wait, who is this guy? And then they're like locked in on what he was saying. Pete Buttigieg, obviously a favorite. We heard John Legend and Sheila E. there, and I have to give a shout out, of course, to Stevie Wonder, who
was a warm-up act.
Kind of delivered the goods early on too.
Right. All right, thanks, Don. We're going to go now to A.B. Klobuchar, who's introducing Tim Walz.
Purple reigns. I stand before you in support of our next Vice President, Tim Walz. In Minnesota, we trust a coach who turned a team that was 0-27 into state champions. In Minnesota, we trust a hunter who has stood in a deer stand in 10-degree weather. In Minnesota, we trust a candidate who has made a viral video on how to change a burnt-out headlight. And I know we aren't alone, but in Minnesota, we love a dad in plaid. So Tim and I go way back. He taught high school right down the road from where my husband John grew up. My mother-in-law even brought him and Gwen a Parmesan chicken dinner when their son was born. That's what we do in America. We look out for our neighbors. Tim has been doing that his whole life, on the farm and in the factory, with his students and his fellow service members. And the truth is, that matters. Who better to take on the price of gas than a guy who could pull over to help change your tire? Who better to serve our nation than a guy who has served in uniform? Who better to find common ground than a guy with Midwestern common sense? A former football coach knows how to level the playing field. And a former public school teacher knows how to school the likes of J.D. Vance. What you've done with your life matters, and what you do with power matters too. Tim has delivered paid leave, school lunches, and the biggest tax cut in Minnesota history. A Democrat from a red district in a purple state, Tim has brought Minnesota together. And together with Vice President Kamala Harris, I know he will do the same for our nation. America, there is so much that we share, so much that connects us. Way up north in Minnesota, out of Lake Itasca, flows the Mississippi River. It starts small and it grows wider. It flows down to Wisconsin and to Iowa. It goes down to Illinois and to Missouri. It goes to Kentucky and Tennessee. It goes to Arkansas, and it goes way down to Mississippi. And then it goes all the way down to New Orleans, Louisiana. America where the spirit of our nation's resilience abounds. So let us commit here and now to cross the river of our divides to get to a higher ground. And let us join together to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. And up next, we are going to hear Klobuchar was talking about Walz's career, his past life, his time as a high school teacher, his time as an assistant football coach. We're next going to hear from some of the students
Ben Ingman from Minnesota.
from that time in Walz's life. This is Ben Ingman, who was a student of Walz's, walking out the stage now to speak to the crowd.
Tim Walz is the kind of guy you can count on to push you out of a snowbank. I know this because Tim Walz has pushed me out of a snowbank. I grew up next door to the Walzes in Mankato. Mr. Walz was also my geography teacher and my coach. Not for high school football, but for 7th grade basketball and track. So what was a high school football coach doing, coaching 7th grade basketball and track? Well, there was a kid in the high school who couldn't afford to pay for lunch, and he ran up a lot of debt. And Tim and Gwen decided they'd help pay it off. They started calling around the district to see if there were any positions they could fill to make a little extra money, and that's how he wound up coaching us 7th graders. That's right. Coach Walz got us excited about what we might achieve together. He believed in us, and he helped us believe in each other. And his leadership stuck. That track team went on to win a state title, just like the football team. That's right. Speaking of which, come on out, Scarlets. Yeah!
Now you've got a bunch of former players on this team all wearing their jerseys, very far removed from their time as high school, but now they get to talk about their high school football team on a national stage. And they're all waving to the crowd in the red and white jerseys. Curious how many of them still have those jerseys in their closet at home and how many had to get new ones. But this is Walz's football team all waving. I'm not sure if they're going to speak, but they're all out there on the stage now. Going to go up to Mara Eliason over the Mankato High School fight song. Mara, you said earlier tonight this is not an evening about policy, it's about identity. We have heard Tim Walz described as a nice guy, a guy who can stand out in the cold, push you out of a snowbank, coach your team, teach your class. What does he need to say tonight when he comes out stage to talk for himself to establish this political image, have it solidify with Americans?
Yeah, it's not identity like we usually talk about it, like racial or gender. It's about identity as a decent American from a small town. You just saw his high school winning statewide championship team, much older, put on a few pounds, but there they all were, and they look exactly like the kind of voters that Democrats are trying to appeal to tonight. They're from the Midwest.
Mara, let's be charitable. Anybody
white.
putting on a
And,
jersey or shirt from their high school days is probably...
Yeah, but that's what's so great about it. It's
yeah.
like, and the fact that they love him to this day, he was the Mr. Chips of their youth.
Yeah.
And they've had wonderful testimonials to him. And this is one of the reasons that Tim Walz was put on the ticket, because Kamala Harris felt that he had real appeal to independents and voters in the blue wall that Democrats needed. And also, another reason why he was picked is he does not have presidential ambitions, which is kind of ironic because tonight was the showcase for Democrats with presidential ambitions. We heard from Pete Buttigieg, we heard from Wes Moore, we heard from Josh Shapiro, and I can guarantee you we'll be hearing more about them in the future, 4 years from now or 8 years from now. And conventions are a very time-honored place to debut yourself on the national stage. Barack Obama did it to great effect. Bill Clinton did it. And we saw some of that tonight. But Tim Walz is not one of those people. Tim Walz was a congressman, a governor, and now he wants to be a vice president, but he is not looking to be the chief executive.
And correction.
And that was something that recommended him to Kamala Harris.
It's Mankato West High School. I got the name of the school wrong. I don't want to undercut the team there. Asma rather. Remind us what Walz brings to the ticket as it relates to Kamala Harris, because anybody who's running for president and picking a running mate, they're looking for a governing partner, they're looking for an edge to help them win, but they're also looking to round out their own experience, their own persona. What does Walz bring to a possible Harris administration?
Well, I think a couple of things. As you mentioned, she really was looking for a governing partner, and she sees him having that sort of executive experience as being really helpful. But again, I do think that he just demographically really speaks to a different part of the Democratic Party that they're trying to court. You know, as Mara said, I really do think that the visuals of seeing a whole bunch of football players on stage, largely, they were all white, former football players on stage, speaks to a crowd. And, you know, I was with the vice president, both Vice President Harris and then her running mate Tim Walz the other day when they did this little mini day trip bus tour in Pennsylvania, and one of the stops that they went to was a football team practice on a Sunday. And you should have seen it, right? Yeah, exactly. You know the area well. And so it was Western Pennsylvania. And you should have seen, I mean, Tim Walz was really in his element, giving these guys this sort of, inspirational speech that politics isn't all that different than football. It's about teamwork. And it was an interesting moment. He's really at home speaking, I think, to different crowds and audiences. I think the other thing he brings, is fundamentally, I think about this a lot in terms of the teachers that I've had.
Yeah.
It's a really unique personality trait to be able to speak to a broad set of different types of people when you're a teacher. You sort of see folks in a different light, and we haven't had a whole lot of people in public service, at least at this highest level, who are teachers or former teachers.
That's a great point, Asma. I remember thinking that seeing Jill Biden out the campaign trail stumping for her husband, and you could see the way that she talked to a crowd and responded to questions, interacted. You saw that as the teacher coming out right there, and it is such a skill set, and it's such a powerful skill set with a good teacher, a good communicator. We are waiting.
That's right.
Yeah.
I really do think it is.
Oh, go ahead, Asma. We had a little bit more of a delay than usual there. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I really do think that is a unique skill set that we don't see in a lot of people. I think it also just allows them to engage really in a personal way. I hadn't seen it much on the campaign trail until that trip out to Western Pennsylvania.
And everybody's going to see him now as he makes his way onto the stage. This is the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, who is now the Democratic Party's nominee for vice president. Walz is on the stage, waving to the crowd, wearing a bright blue tie, gesturing up to the upper deck of the arena. Here's Governor Tim Walz.
Thank you.
Tim Walz settling in to speak. The custom signs tonight are blue with white lettering. They all say Coach Walz. His time as the high school football coach is a big part of his biography that Kamala Harris and the rest of the Democrats have really latched onto. They're really excited about. It sounds like they might be chanting Coach Walz, which crowds have been doing since his initial rollout.
Thank you, first of all, to Vice President Harris. Thanks for putting your trust in me and for inviting me to be part of this incredible campaign. And a thank you to President Joe Biden for 4 years of strong, historic leadership. It's the honor of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States. We're all here tonight for one beautiful, simple reason. We love this country. So thank you to all of you here in Chicago and all of you watching at home tonight. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your determination. And most of all, thank you for bringing the joy to this fight. Now, I grew up in Butte, Nebraska, a town of 400 people. I had 24 kids in my high school class, and none of them went to Yale. But I'll tell you what, growing up in a small town like that, you learn how to take care of each other. That family down the road, they may not think like you do. They may not pray like you do. They may not love like you do, but they're your neighbors. And you look out for them, and they look out for you. Everybody belongs, and everybody has a responsibility to contribute. For me, it was serving in the Army National Guard. I joined up 2 days after my 17th birthday, and I proudly wore our nation's uniform for 24 years. My dad, a Korean War era Army veteran, died of lung cancer a couple years later. He left behind a mountain of medical debt. Thank God for Social Security survivor benefits. And thank God for the GI Bill that allowed my dad and me to go to college, and millions of other Americans. Eventually, like the rest of my family, I fell in love with teaching. Three out of 4 of us married teachers. I wound up teaching social studies and coaching football at Mankato West High School. Go Scarlets! We ran a 44 defense. We played through to the whistle on every single play, and we even won a state championship. Never closed the yearbook, people. But it was those players and my students who inspired me to run for Congress. They saw in me what I had hoped to instill in them, a commitment to the common good, an understanding that we're all in this together, and the belief that a single person can make a real difference for their neighbors. So there I was, a 40-something high school teacher with little kids, 0 political experience, and no money, running in a deep red district. But you know what? Never underestimate a public school teacher. Never. I represented my neighbors in Congress for 12 years, and I learned an awful lot. I learned how to work across the aisle on issues like growing the rural economies and taking care of veterans. And I learned how to compromise without compromising my values. Then I came back to serve as governor, and we got right to work, making a difference in our neighbors' lives. We cut taxes for the middle class. We passed paid family and medical leave. We invested in fighting crime and affordable housing. We cut the cost of prescription drugs and helped people escape the kind of medical debt that nearly sank my family. And we made sure that every kid in our state gets breakfast and lunch every day. So while other states were banning books from their schools, we were banishing hunger from ours. We also protected reproductive freedom because in Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and the personal choices they make. And even if we wouldn't make those same choices for ourselves, we've got a golden rule. Mind your own damn business. And that includes IVF and fertility treatments. And this is personal for Gwen and I. If you've never experienced the hell that is infertility, I guarantee you, you know somebody who has. And I can remember praying each night for a phone call. The pit in your stomach when the phone would ring, and the absolute agony when we heard the treatments hadn't worked. It took Gwen and I years, but we had access to fertility treatments. And when our daughter was born, we named her Hope. Hope, Gus, and Gwen, you are my entire world, and I love you. I'm letting you in on how we started a family because this is a big part about what this election is about. Freedom. When Republicans use the word freedom, they mean that the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. Corporations free to pollute your air and water. And banks free to take advantage of customers. But when we Democrats talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make a better life for yourself and the people that you love. Freedom to make your own health care decisions. And yeah, your kids' freedom to go to school without worrying about being shot dead in the hall. Look, I know guns. I'm a veteran. I'm a hunter. And I was a better shot than most Republicans in Congress, and I got the trophies to prove it. But I'm also a dad. I believe in the Second Amendment, but I also believe our first responsibility is to keep our kids safe. That's what this is all about. The responsibility we have to our kids, to each other, and to the future that we're building together, in which everyone is free to build the kind of life they want. But not everyone has that same sense of responsibility. Some folks just don't understand what it takes to be a good neighbor. Take Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Their Project 2025 will make things much, much harder for people who are just trying to live their lives. They spent a lot of time pretending they know nothing about this. But look, I coached high school football long enough to know, and trust me on this, when somebody takes the time to draw up a playbook, they're going to use it. And we know if these guys get back in the White House, they'll start jacking up the costs on the middle class, they'll repeal the Affordable Care Act, they'll gut Social Security and Medicare, and they will ban abortion across this country with or without Congress. Here's the thing, it's an agenda nobody asked for. It's an agenda that serves nobody except the richest and the most extreme amongst us. And it's an agenda that does nothing for our neighbors in need. Is it weird? Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's also wrong. And it's dangerous. It's not just me saying so. It's Trump's own people. They were with him for 4 years. They're warning us that the next 4 years will be much, much worse. You know, when I was teaching every year, we'd elect a student body president. And you know what? Those teenagers could teach Donald Trump a hell of a lot about what a leader is. Leaders don't spend all day insulting people and blaming others. Leaders do the work. So I don't know about you, I'm ready to turn the page on these guys. So go ahead, say it with me. We're not going back. We've got something better to offer the American people. It starts with our candidate, Kamala Harris. From her first day as a prosecutor, as a district attorney, as an attorney general, as a United States senator, and then our vice president, she's fought on the side of the American people. She's taken on the predators and fraudsters. She's taken down the transnational gangs, and she stood up to powerful corporate interests. She has never hesitated to reach across that aisle if it meant improving your lives. And she's always done it with energy, with passion, and with joy. Folks, we've got a chance to make Kamala Harris the next president of the United States. But I think we owe it to the American people to tell them exactly what she'd do as president before we ask them for their votes. So here, this is the part, clip and save it and send it to your undecided relatives so they know. If you're a middle-class family or a family trying to get into the middle class, Kamala Harris is going to cut your taxes. If you're getting squeezed by prescription drug prices, Kamala Harris is going to take on Big Pharma. If you're hoping to buy a home, Kamala Harris is going to help make it more affordable. And no matter who you are, Kamala Harris is going to stand up and fight for your freedom to live the life that you want to lead. Because that's what we want for ourselves, and it's what we want for our neighbors. You know, you might not know it, but I haven't given a lot of big speeches like this. But I have given a lot of pep talks. So let me finish with this, team. It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team. Kamala Harris is tough. Kamala Harris is experienced, and Kamala Harris is ready. Our job for everyone watching is to get in the trenches and do the blocking and tackling. 1 inch at a time, 1 yard at a time, 1 phone call at a time, 1 door knock at a time, 1 $5 donation at a time. Look, we got 76 days. That's nothing. There'll be time to sleep when you're dead. We're going to leave it on the field. That's how we'll keep moving forward. That's how we'll turn the page on Donald Trump. That's how we'll build a country where workers come first. Healthcare and housing are human rights. And the government stays the hell out of your bedroom. That's how we make America a place where no child is left hungry, where no community is left behind, where nobody gets told they don't belong. That's how we're gonna fight. And as the next president of the United States always says, when we fight, when we fight, when we fight, thank you. God bless.
That's Minnesota Governor Tim Walz now officially accepting the Democratic Party's nomination for vice president. This is live special coverage from NPR News. Tim Walz is waving to the crowd. His wife Gwen walking out on stage to greet him, and going to go to Don Gagne on the floor. Don, how'd the crowd react to Governor Walz?
They are clearly really thrilled with their vice presidential nominee. They loved the old high school state champs coming out on the stage wearing their old jerseys. They cheered him. Scott, we've been talking about signs all week. People were handed placards, actually on poles, so tall, skinny signs that said Coach Walz,
Coach Walz.
and those signs never stopped bouncing up and down during the whole speech. So it was a moment for this crowd to kind of revel in the plain talk and the plain spoken style of Governor Walz.
Walz's family is joining him out on stage. His wife, his kids, Gus and Hope, were out on stage giving him hugs, raising hands. Looks like the extended family has now made its way out on stage, each taking the turn to give him a big hug in front of this crowd. Don, Governor Walz, just like the Democrats, sounds like we might have lost Don there. So too much excitement down for our connection on the floor. So I'm going to go up to Mara Liasson and Asma Khalid, who are watching the speech from high above in the press area. Mara, what'd you make of Governor Walz's speech?
I thought he was better than I was even expecting.
Yeah?
He gave a great speech. He told a story. He's from a tiny town. He was a public school teacher. He served his country in the National Guard. And as someone who certainly would struggle to make any sports metaphor that made any sense, he knew what he was talking about at the end, where he basically said it's the fourth quarter and we're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we have the ball.
Yeah.
And we know what we're going to do. It's going to be one foot at a time, one pass at a time. And, he said, I am not used to giving speeches like this, but I've given a lot of pep talks, and he proceeded to give one to the crowd, which quite frankly ate it up.
The Walz family has now left the stage. Governor Walz has left the stage. And Asma, what were your thoughts on that speech?
Look, I think that Kamala Harris, and this is the job, I would say, of really any vice presidential pick, running mate, really needed a hype man, and that's what she got with Tim Walz. She goes out on the campaign trail. She calls him Coach Walz. Folks probably saw in the audience the little signs that the entire crowd was holding up said Coach Walz, and what he delivered here was a pep rally. I mean, it has been akin to the speeches he's been given out on the road. He's really trying to make the case for Harris. And I would say broadly embodying this theme of freedoms, which I think is really interesting, how Democrats are trying to reclaim the narrative of freedom. It's something, in fact, that Kamala Harris herself started talking about a lot after that Supreme Court Dobbs decision. I remember in interviews I did with her, she was talking about freedom, but it was sort of her own niche message. Now I would argue it is the central tenet of the Democrats' re-election bid, and it was really interesting to hear so many of the speakers on stage today talk about the Democrats being the party of personal choice and freedom, talking about reproductive rights, talking about not banning books, and trying to pitch the Republican Party as being the party that is anti-freedom.
And Walz giving a Midwestern spin on that, saying the motto of mind your own business. Asma, we have talked a lot.
Which is quite Midwestern, I'd say, as a native Midwesterner.
Very true. We have talked a lot about the white rural vote, the white exurban vote, particularly the white male vote, getting trickier and trickier for the Democratic Party to capture over the last decade plus. And you could just see the way that speakers like Senator Amy Klobuchar and others spoke about Walz, the parts of his biography that Democrats have endorsed. It just seems like the party is so enthusiastic that they have someone on the ticket that they feel like can maybe reverse those trends or cut into those trends just a little bit, given who he is, given where he's from, and his profile.
That's right. I mean, you heard one of the speakers introduce him as saying that Tim Walz is the kind of guy who would push you out of a snowbank. And he said, I know because Tim Walz actually did push me out of a snowbank. And so, I think they are certainly leaning into these biographical details of who Walz is, not just because of where he's from in Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota, I would say, is a state that tends to, lean fairly convincingly Democratic, but it's about the idea that Democrats are really prioritizing the so-called blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and they do think that white voters that maybe Tim Walz would be able to speak to, really could resonate with there. I think, though, I will say what's interesting to me about Walz broadly is that by and large, people in the state seem to like him, and he was rather popular. And I think that, there is sometimes a perception that the sort of blue wall states are very white, and of course, demographically, that is a good part of the population. But I think Tim Walz is somebody who kind of cuts across currents. I mean, the high school team he was speaking to in Pennsylvania was largely African American, and he was delivering a similar pep rally there to the sort of pep rally he delivered here tonight.
Can I just say one other thing about him that really struck me? Is he put his story in the context of what the Democratic Party has stood for generations, about we respect our neighbors, we help our neighbors, we work together, we don't believe in us versus them or people who don't belong. And that is the story that successful Democratic presidential candidates have told since before Franklin Roosevelt. And that's what I think, Obama told it, there's no red states and blue states, there's just United States of America. And the Democrats are hoping that works again for them. And I think Tim Walz was a really good messenger for that.
And it comes at a time where the Trump-era Republican Party has tried so hard to paint the Democratic Party as the party of the elite, the party of the academics, the party of the rich people in the suburbs, the party of extreme identity politics.
Right.
On that
who has the Ivy League degrees in this election?
And he made a point of that.
Yeah,
right?
who has the Ivy League degrees? It's Trump and Vance.
Yeah.
It's certainly not Harris and Walz.
And you heard Walz.
One other thing I thought that was really interesting. Oh, Scott, I was going to say, one other thing I thought that was really interesting, given the focus this election cycle on reproductive rights, and really I think the big unknown to me this cycle, it is the first presidential that's taking place after the Supreme Court decided to take away that landmark decision of Roe versus Wade, is that he spoke about his personal decision to use fertility treatments to have his daughter, his family's decision. And I think that those were often decisions you might not necessarily hear a presidential or vice presidential candidate speaking about on the national stage. But I think these are things Democrats are trying to lean into.
Mara, Walz has talked a lot about the joy of the campaign and how much that has shifted over the past month. I mean, it's always worth pointing out just how much of an existential spiral the Democratic Party was in just 4+ weeks ago. When to you was the last time a Democratic convention had this much positive energy? Because I feel like the last few cycles, it's just been,
Oh, I think 2008. I think
Yeah.
Barack Obama had tremendous positive energy. Yeah.
But
And
in the
look,
Trump
they're
era,
just
it's been
joyful at the
fear. It's been
opportunity to be
existential fear.
joyful.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's nothing like Trump to concentrate the mind like a hanging, to concentrate the minds of Democrats. And just the ability to feel positive and hopeful was such an energizing thing for Democrats. It's why they acted so unified, why they put their divisions aside. This is a party that we used to say when they form a firing squad, they get in a circle. But no, you didn't see protests here. They seem to have put their differences aside for now. And they're happy and hopeful. They understand. I think every single speaker tonight has said, look, don't get irrationally exuberant. We don't have a lead yet. There's a lot of hard work ahead. And that's what Walz was trying to say tonight. And, I just think that just the opportunity to have a fighting chance was something that completely changed Democrats' psyches.
Mara, when you're talking,
I don't think there have been large-scale protests.
Asma, I just want to follow real quickly with Mara and then turn back to you, Asma. But Mara, when you are talking to Democrats around Chicago this week, when they're not in front of a lectern, in front of a camera, are they saying to you, we think we're still behind, or are they feeling confident? Because the public polls have shown such a big movement in Harris's direction.
They do not think they're ahead. Anybody who understands what Democrats have to win knows that Kamala Harris has not established a lead. She has closed the gap. The race is neck and neck. But to win, Democrats have to get over 50% of the popular vote to win in the Electoral College. Republicans don't have to win a majority of the popular vote to win the White House. Donald Trump won in 2016 with 46% of the vote. And Democrats know that. For a Democrat to be ahead, they have to be ahead by a number of points. And she's not there yet. And the big question is, will this convention give her a bounce that will last, or it will disappear as other convention bounces have? So the Democrats I talk to are not deluded. They understand that they are still the underdogs. And they're not just saying that so people don't become complacent. They truly believe that, as opposed to the Republicans who spent the week in Milwaukee saying, we have it in the bag, and it might even be a landslide.
Yeah. Asma?
Of course, everything changed after that.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Mara is saying there, that I do think Democrats, certainly even Kamala Harris herself, publicly is talking about the fact that they don't see this at all to be their race. They see themselves, they say, as the underdogs. They are very clear-eyed about the competitive nature of this race. I think by and large, she has seen a large momentum boost. I think the convention here shows that. Last night, she was able to fill 2 arenas, the arena in Milwaukee that Trump had his convention speech at, and the arena here, United Center. I mean, to be able to fill those sorts of 2 stadiums in one night would have been unthinkable as someone who covered Joe Biden's race for him just a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago. So I think that there has been a clear momentum shift. One question, though, I have is that I do think that there's some degree of a sense of, well, how long can this momentum last? And she, I will say on 2 fronts, I think, is going to face additional questions. One is the debate coming up September 10th. I think that is a huge test for her. But secondly, I will also say that she has been facing pressure to articulate more of where she personally stands on certain issues. I think the issue of the war in Gaza, it is not as front of mind for her as it was perhaps front of mind with voters as it was with Biden, but it's an issue that isn't going away so long as there is not a ceasefire hostage deal.
Right. That's Asma Khalid, as well as Mara Eliason. Thank you so much to both of you. I'll check in with you tomorrow night. I'm going to shift to Tamara Keith now. Tam, you have been covering Governor Walz and doing several stories on his career and his relationship with Harris. I want to get to that in a second, but first I want to ask you about the reporting you've been able to do about Walz's time as a teacher and coach, because that was so much of a highlight tonight. The Coach Walz signs on the floor, his former students, the members of his former football team coming out on stage. What was it like as a teacher?
Well, he was apparently everyone's favorite teacher. He did not assign a lot of homework in that social studies class, and instead he encouraged the students to speak up in class, and he listened to them. And the other thing that several students told me is that they were bad students, and that he saw them anyway. Like one student I talked to said, my grades weren't good enough or bad enough that he should remember me, but 2 years later, he remembered him and also remembered that he was chronically late to class. So maybe that's why it was memorable. But, he really is the kind of teacher that students still talk about years later. Students have stories about him downing Oreos or Diet Mountain Dew. And also just about seeing them as people in high school, people whose voices should be heard, and helping them find their voices. One of his students I interviewed actually ended up running for city council and serving in a city council for 6 years. Others have become teachers. Others became involved in politics. And many of them trace that back to their time in his classroom.
And quick, one other thing. What's the best way to describe, based on the 2 or 3 week sample size we have at this point, his relationship with Harris, their dynamic together, how you could see them governing together if they do win?
Right. So they had not spent much time together before he became her running mate. They had an event in Minnesota back in March where they went to a clinic that performs abortions. After that, they actually went quietly to a softball practice, a girls' softball practice in Minnesota, and Vice President Harris, saw Walz do the coach thing and really enjoyed it, I'm told. And since then, they have had sort of this buddy comedy routine out on the campaign trail. They are very different people. They have different taste in music, other than Prince, which they agree on. They have very different taste in food and music and everything else. But they have found a way to work together and to complement each other. Now, does that translate to governing? It's not clear. But one of the reasons that Walz was picked is not just because he was a governor and could be a governing partner, but also because he said he understood the role of vice president and didn't want the job just so he could become president someday. And knowing that your job as vice president is to never get ahead of the boss is very important and something that Harris understands.
Right. She, just like Joe Biden, had a very good sense of what the job was when she was deciding who she wanted her pick for vice president to be. NPR's Tamara Keith. Tam, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again tomorrow night. I'm going to wind things down with Domenico Montanaro here in the studio. Domenico, what was the goal of tonight for Democrats? What did they need to do, and do you think it happened?
Well, I think a big piece of what they're trying to do is have a night with some broad appeal. I mean, not just someone like Oprah Winfrey, who everybody knows, but you're talking about a lot of Republicans who are on the stage as well. And even someone like Bill Clinton, Pete Buttigieg, even Governor Walz. These are the kind of men in Democratic politics who have had success in the Democratic Party. Something about Bill Clinton that, yes, we're looking at the future here, but there are a lot of Democrats who vote who still remember the Clinton years as one of peace and prosperity and who have very fond memories of him in office and of the 90s, right? Yeah. So I think that was a big piece of it. Obviously, this night was about Tim Walz and about introducing him to the country, and he did that in a way where he can testify to his support for Kamala Harris. And as Tam was saying, somebody who's very different than Kamala Harris. He's of the Midwest, from a small town in Nebraska, and of course, he was a football coach, which they continue to lean in on here, and him telling the crowd that they're in the fourth quarter and that they're driving down the field, down a field goal, and that they can do this, right? I mean, that's what a pep talk is. And it's an interesting thing because he's not from San Francisco, right? In the way that Kamala Harris is from California. It's very different. And part of the ticket, part of what you want to do on a ticket is balance. And what a good partner does, whether it's has a running mate or in a relationship or whatever, you want that person to bring out your best self and make you feel good. And clearly Tim Walz does that for Kamala Harris.
Let's look ahead to tomorrow night. Kamala Harris is giving her acceptance speech. It'll obviously be the main speech of the night, the main focus of the night. Can you think of any comparison point of somebody who gets to that moment of the national spotlight to tell their story, to say what they want to do as president, at a point when, due to the unique nature of this campaign, there's still... Kamala Harris is known to Americans, but as we saw is how quickly her approval ratings changed, how quickly the polls changed, wasn't known in a deep way. People didn't feel like they had a set view of who Kamala Harris was.
Well, I mean, I think it's a little, overwrought. Some people have made these comparisons, obviously, to Barack Obama, and it's too much, and they're very different people and very different kinds of speakers. But I do think Obama and Bill Clinton were people who had to prove themselves. They were young. They didn't have a ton of experience on the national stage. I mean, sure, Bill Clinton now is seen as somebody who's been in the public eye for a long time, but not really in 1992. He was a guy from a small state in Arkansas. He really leaned into that and had to really introduce himself while going against a sitting vice president in George H.W. Bush, someone certainly much older, a lot more foreign policy experience, for example. And that was the same thing that was true of Barack Obama in 2008. Really not a lot of foreign policy experience. That's why he picked somebody like Joe Biden to be sort of the graybeard who could, help him legislatively. It was a real governing pick. And this is a different way of having somebody like a Tim Walz help a Kamala Harris and lend some credibility in different ways to her.
Yeah, it's interesting. Harris has been delivering, by and large, the same stump speech over the last few weeks, which would never have been a remarkable thing to say except the Trump era, where focused stump speeches are not a thing that we see from the former president. But we expect to hear, I assume, a similar speech from Harris, but expanded using the platform of this big audience. We will cover that for you tomorrow night. That wraps our live special coverage for tonight, though. Again, tomorrow, the final night of the Democratic National Convention. We will be covering it for you online and on your radio. This has been live special coverage from NPR News. Thanks for listening.
NPR's elections coverage comes from Saatva, committed to making handcrafted mattresses that help lull people to sleep and keep them sleeping soundly. More information is at saatva.com/NPR. And from Hiscox, committed to helping small businesses protect their dreams. Quotes and information on customized insurance for specific risks are available at hiscox.com. Hiscox, business insurance experts.
Why is bluegrass growing in the desert? Where do bridges rise to cross borders?
Spreads happiness.
How do old streets turn new corners?
Come through, we give them a sense of hope.
When do 300 million people know the same loss?
Staff who say they are exhausted on the front lines of the pandemic.
When can we share the same victory?
The launch of James Webb.
It's when we commit to listen. The NPR network is listener-supported, independent journalism in communities around the country. It amplifies more voices, more journalists, more movements, more Americas, and takes all of us on new journeys. It takes all of us closer to home. It takes all of us.